And we're live. So, for all of those of you who came out last week, you got to see a awesome show that we had Dean Barnes as our guest, and he shared with us his personal mission on amassing a hockey card collection, a collection of nearly 100 black and biracial players who appeared in at least one NHL game since Willie O'Ree became the first black player to play on January 18, 1958. Plus, he also kind of told us about his own personal journey as a person of color who, from his youth, discovered his love of hockey, meeting his idol Tony McKegney, and how he still to this day plays the Canadian pastime. So we hope that people get inspiration from looking at his collection and understanding that, collecting can be whatever you want to make it to be. And it's also important that it tells a diverse story of our traditional nature of collecting. You can make it anything you want it to be. You can make it inspirational as you want to be, and you can be yourself and not be afraid of who you want to collect. So with that, we're really excited to talk about tonight's guest, and Kent's going to curb his enthusiasm and take it from here.
So welcome everybody to episode number 31. For tonight, we're honored to have, and that's right, not just one, but two. The gentlemen we're about to introduce to you tonight are what is known as philatelists. What is a philatelist? It's one who collects and or studies stamps. Yeah, so we'll be talking about the world of stamp collecting, the synergies of stamp collecting and card collecting. So please welcome the host of the YouTube channel Conversationists with Philatelists, Michael Cortese and Charles Epting to the show.
Hey, guys.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much for having us.
No, thank you for being here.
And I'd like to mention that they're very well dressed. So just make sure, that's a good representation of that end of the hobby, and we're wearing T-shirts, so you can just see where we stack.
So, gentlemen, can you give the both of you give us a little introduction as to how Philately started for each of you? When did it all start, and what is it about stamp collecting that keeps you hooked to this day? So, one of you let's start.
Michael, I'll turn it over to you first.
All right.
Sure. Yeah. My introduction to the hobby started around 8 years old with my father, third generation philatelist. When he started me in the hobby, he wasn't just a philatelist himself. He was a stamp dealer as well. So he would go out and buy collections either privately or from auction houses, and then repackage them and ship them to other auction houses or sell them to other collectors privately. So I kind of got into the hobby at a young age on more of the pricing material, selling material style. So he would have me price items, find items, obviously not at 8 years old, but then as I got older, high school, college, things like that, I would start buying collections with him, and he would bring me into the hobby to show me the passion that other collectors have and kind of what we can do to help other people find their collections.
So I had a lot more sort of circuitous route to the hobby than Michael. Michael was sort of born into it and raised with it, and didn't have much of a chance, I guess you could say. I was born with the collector gene. So growing up, it was baseball cards, it was fossils, it was Legos, it was books, it was everything, really except for stamps, even a little bit of coin collecting. But stamps just never caught my interest. I don't know why, but it just wasn't a part of my makeup. Until I got to college. I was at the University of Southern California, was looking for some sort of hobby that would help keep me busy, something that initially would be affordable and small, which very quickly I realized that stamp collecting stops being affordable and small at a very fast pace. But really for me, it just started as a way to pass the time. I was studying sort of the cultural history of the 1920s and 30s, and I just got to thinking, what were stamps like back then? So I started buying them on eBay. You can buy, a couple of stamps for, 100 stamps for $1 or whatever. And I just started doing that, just amassing more and more stamps and putting them into my album. And from there, it just sort of grew into more and more a part of my life until I was presented with the opportunity to, make it a full-time career, which was not the path I was planning on taking in life. But, you sort of reach these crossroads and you can't say no to certain opportunities. And I've only been collecting stamps for probably about 7 years now. And I've been in the business for 5 of those years. So it's all been sort of very, very rapid since I discovered my love of this hobby.
You did hit on one thing. They are small.
They are. The problem is you can get a lot of them really easily. And then you end up with bankers boxes full of stamps and albums full of stamps. And they're sort of deceptive in that way. Exactly. Exactly that, but just really tiny, much smaller and thinner than the cards.
For sure.
So when it comes to stamp collecting for both of you, so what is it about the stamps? Is it like the picture, the story? Like, what is it that makes you still be interested in the hobby right now?
For me, when I started out, it was all about the design. I was really drawn to some of the more classic Newfoundland, some of the French issues, Canada. The designs that they put on these stamps were just absolutely breathtaking. Some of the French colonies from the 20s, 30s, 40s, they were just gorgeous. But now, as I grow into the hobby more, it's definitely the stories. It's definitely the more of the postal history, more of the journeys that the covers go on, the history behind the scarce issues themselves. So what draws you in is the eye appeal, and then I feel like what hooks you, what gets you is the stories.
I feel like I'm just gonna take an opposing
Go for
it. So for me early on, because I was collecting mostly American stamps, common stuff from the early 20th century, and the designs are nice. That's Teddy Roosevelt or that's Martha Washington. They're fine. They're kind of your standard, bread and butter presidents and founding fathers and things. For me, it was just the thought that, again, I was studying the 20s and 30s very heavily. So the thought that Franklin Roosevelt could have used this stamp, or F. Scott Fitzgerald could have used this stamp,
Yes.
and even if even your everyday person, your average boy or girl in the 1920s, this is what they would have licked and stuck on a letter. Who knows what that letter may have contained? For me, it was just very evocative that somebody a century ago, used this. And, coins are neat, and you can certainly imagine coins changing hands. But stamps, the fact that by using them, you sort of necessarily have to destroy them. You have to just obliterate them with ink. I think
Right.
that's interesting as well. Like, you can prove that it did its job. You can prove that it served its purpose. So that was really fun for me. And that was how I got into it. Of course, the artistry, the stories behind the stamps is always really interesting too. How stamps have been used for propaganda by different governments, and how stamps have, it's sort of the social connotations behind stamps, I think, are very interesting as well. Nowadays, most people are used to, going to the post office and they get a flag stamp and they don't really think much about it. Maybe they go buy the new Star Wars or Harry Potter stamps, but stamps used to have a lot more cultural gravity, I feel, and who did and didn't make it on a stamp really told you a lot about who was in power. And I think that part of the story is really interesting as well.
That's true. That's very, very true.
I
But also,
think we sort of take the designs for granted today. It's just a flag.
yeah, I never thought of it that way in terms of the social political theater in terms of using stamps, but that is very true. And going back to what Michael said, it's very his answer has a lot of similarities to card collecting. Know what I mean?
Oh, very much so. And the opposing views aren't so opposing. They work in synergy with each other.
I feel like we just sort of, we've gone like backwards on everything. I feel like Michael started on the dealer side and then became a collector, and I flipped. We're just, I guess, complementary in that regard.
It's almost like the whole idealist and realist. So I'm the idealist, Kent's the realist. So it's the same thing in your world too.
So, gentlemen, not too long ago, during the last week in July, the National Sports Collectors Convention, which is very well known for us card collectors, was held at the Donald E. Stevens Convention Center in Chicago. Interestingly enough, you both just recently attended the Great American Stamp Show in Chicago at the same venue that ran from August 12th to the 15th. What was that like for the both of you, and how was the turnout for it?
So I mentioned when we spoke briefly last night, I went to the National in 2000 when it was in Anaheim. So that was my last real card show. And I didn't realize that we just missed it. Had I known, I would have maybe tried to go in a week early or something to catch that for a day. But this is a big deal for us because, like most hobbies, I'm sure card collecting is the same. There's been this real lack of in-person interaction for the last year and a half. There's been a lot of Zoom meetings. That's why Michael and I started our podcast, was just to catch up with people during the pandemic, but no amount of that can replace shaking someone's hand or digging through a box of envelopes or that sort of thing. So there was a show in San Francisco 2 weekends before that was sort of the appetizer before the big, Great American Stamp Show put on by the American Philatelic Society is the big annual national show. And 2020's edition was virtual, and it was fun. But it really felt like we were back. It was sort of the first time since March of 2020, I guess, that I felt at home again. I felt like our world had sort of returned to normal, taking all proper precautions and whatnot, not being reckless by any means, but it felt like we were back.
Yeah. The show before that was Nebraska in 2019, and attendance wise, I feel like it was almost similar.
It was neck and neck, I would say.
Yeah, it really was.
I think there's been a lot of pent up demand for something like this. Chicago's a great central location. It's easy to get to from everywhere, and it was a lot of fun to be back.
Yeah,
great. For those of us in our audience who are not familiar with stamp shows, when you're at a stamp show, what does one do? For example, is it similar to sports card collecting shows where there's a lot of buying and trading that gets done on the show floor?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different ones. You can start out with just the basic Bourse show, where it's just regular dealers with their stock inventory. You go and you just buy there. There may be like a little kids booth or an activity booth that you can go to, but these much larger shows like the one in Chicago, there's an auction going at the same time. There's all these exhibits. How many exhibits? 800 frames of exhibits?
There were 1,000 frames. Yes,
1,000 frames of exhibits.
Exhibiting, and I hope we can talk about that more, because I feel like that's a piece of the hobby that people outside of the hobby don't really know about. The fact that there's competitive stamp collecting.
Yeah.
And people spend their entire lives and their entire fortunes trying
thousands and thousands of dollars.
Exactly. Trying to, collect all the right pieces to tell a story. And then there's accredited judges, both on a national and international level. It's almost like, I feel like it's the IOC versus like the NFL. Like you've got the national circuit, and then you can sort of graduate and go to the Olympics or something. And people take their competitive stamp collecting and exhibiting very seriously. Of course, there's all sorts of behind the scenes politics and just like with any competitive league. That's one part of a stamp show. Again, you've got the dealers you can go buy, but Michael, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's a huge part.
Part of it is just fascinating.
Yeah, you were talking about people going all over the place. I mean, I was talking to one gentleman after hours about he'd won a large gold, and I was asking him what he was going to do and what this meant for him now. And he said, "Oh, this is fantastic. I'm going to London. I'm going to Cape of Good Hope. I'm going to Munich. And he's got to go to all these different places to exhibit his stamp collection so that he can try and win this massive international award. But he's got to show it at all these different. It was phenomenal. And it's just, yeah.
Can you kindly explain to our audience what the large gold is?
Charles, you might know a bit more about that one.
so when you show your exhibit, and basically what an exhibit is, there's what are called frames, which are picture a big sort of 8-frame picture frame sort of thing, where you can fit 16 regular letter-sized pages in it.
Okay.
So you tell your story sort of in units of 16 pages, all the way up to 10 frames, which would be 160 pages worth of material.
Wow.
And the accredited judges go through and they look for certain things. What's the importance of your collection? What's the presentation like? How rare is your material? And they give you points on a scale of 1 to 100. And there's different metal levels. So it goes from silver to large silver to vermeil to large vermeil to gold to large gold, which is the crowning achievement. That's like a gold medal at the Olympics. If your stamp exhibit gets a large gold, that's the cream of the crop.
So I guess in our world, we don't have anything like to that level, but besides bragging rights, we do have that. But there is a subset of collectors who are PSA collectors, or PSA is professional sports authenticators. They slab the cards in those rigid plastics, and they give you a grade. And some of the PSA guys, they're part of this PSA set registry, and you get awarded if you are the best. You have the best registry of a particular issue. So we have that. However, it's a bit amazed at how global this is, because stamp collecting is a global phenomenon. Trading cards is mostly an American, Canadian, North American phenomenon. It's just starting to reach the global stage. I had a kind of comical thought. I don't know why, but it's like it has a very similar circuit like the dog show.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's not the same. Yeah.
I was talking. Have you guys seen the movie Best in Show?
Yes.
Okay, so I was talking to a friend of mine who's in the stamp hobby, and he said his dream is a movie about stamp shows like Best in Show. Sort of a loving sort of mockumentary about the world, because there are so many similarities to the dog show world. A lot of these hobbies, there's a lot of the same blood that comes from the same place. So I think that's a very apt analogy.
Because it draws in people who might not necessarily go to a show otherwise. People have their own
that's
circles,
true. Yeah,
and
right.
if visiting the bourse is nice, a lot of the auctions is nice, but you can do some of the bidding online now. But if they didn't have these exhibits to go to, if they didn't need to win these awards, it's bringing in people who have these kind of collections to the show now to just specifically exhibit, to specifically try and win these awards, who might not have attended the show in the first place because they can do it via phone bid. Or
it allows also for the museum traveling roadshow / museum aspect.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
it's a good way. So one of the things that collectibles in general struggle with, and I think all collectibles have this, is to have their niche group. So there's a very niche core group that love everything about stamps or everything about trading cards. Then you get the periphery. So you're like, the periphery is like, I don't quite get it. There's nothing really in it for me. And then when you have a museum aspect, like, oh, okay, I'll go check it out. And all you need is, if you take digital, for example, you need a 2% conversion rate. So if 100 people go and 2% of people convert and turn into collectors, then you've won, right?
Absolutely.
You're growing the hobby. So
yeah.
Anyway,
Sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say the last thing I'll say about exhibiting too, just to tie it back to sports really quick. The American circuit is called the World Series of Philately. So
Interesting.
There's about 30 some odd shows throughout America every year that are WSP qualifying shows, and then every year there's the Champion of Champions, where the winners of all 30 of those shows go head to head. So the way people sort of, figure out, I'm going to try and win in Sarasota or Seattle or Portland, because all you need to do is notch a victory at one of those shows to make it to the Champion of Champions. But I think that terminology, World Series, is funny how they draw from, professional sports to
right.
To advertise this stuff. It adds to the pomp and circumstance of the whole thing.
Well, that works because the World Series, and you also mentioned a soccer reference or football reference, the Champions League. So there's a Champions League in football where, soccer or American. Now I'm forgetting which one to call it.
Now you're speaking Michael's language, by the way.
Yeah. So going down that whole way of thought, there's a lot of synergies in terms of like the trade-offs between the way we think of the thing. Already in the first 18 minutes we've chatted, we've gone down many different tributaries of thought. So this is awesome. And what we want the crowd who do watch us now and live and after is, we're not that different. We're all kind of the same. We have our own venue and our own vehicle to do the collection, but all our quirks and the competitiveness and fires are all there. Anyway. Sorry, I lost track of where we are with our questions. Kent.
You're next. The story. We're curious to know your story.
Oh, right. All right. Sorry. So when I get guests are good when I've forgotten the questions and so. All right. So I'll reset here. First of all, before we go there, I want to say hi to Dennis.
Oh yes. Hey Dennis, thanks for coming by.
Dennis checks out all our shows regularly. Thank you for coming. And we have Name, who's Indigenous rookie card collector. So for Michael and Charles, he collects only rookie cards of NHL players of Indigenous descent.
Wow.
So he's fairly well known for that.
I love the specialization. I'm used to people just trying to complete a set. You have to get the whole top set or whatever. But the fact that again, the black hockey players and the Indigenous, I think that's fascinating that people find their own little niche. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's what we want to show. There's more than just what's the word I'm gonna look for? The pop culture aspect. There's other not so pop culture aspects of life with collecting. All right, so back to the question. Make sure I stay on track here. So we're curious to know your story. As the two of you decided to collaborate and do a show, and you're here today, and your show is quite popular. What led you to create your channel? How did you two meet? Tell us all about it.
So we met. Our meeting story, our origin story, is kind of long-winded. There's a group within the larger organization in America called the American Philatelic Society, and there was a small group within that, led by a gentleman named Alex Hyman, called the Young Philatelic Leaders Fellowship. So we were both members of that fellowship. We applied, and I believe you have to be under 28 years old and over 18. So over 18, under 28, we both applied, and we were 1 year after the other. I was 2013, he was 2014, and they send you to different shows. So my first show was in Milwaukee. Charles's first show was in Hartford, Connecticut. And we kind of started down the organized philately path that way.
Young people might not have the resources to go to stamp shows or get to know the right people. So it's a great program they have where they foot the bill for all of your travel and make those introductions. And I know it's what kept.
Oh, wait, they actually foot the bill?
They do.
Yes.
They get very generous sponsors who cover airfare and hotels and everything. Because again, I was fresh out of college. I didn't have a job yet. No way would I have been able to travel across the country for a stamp show. And without that very formative experience, they probably wouldn't have kept me so interested in the hobby. So it's a wonderful program that I can't speak highly enough of.
That's impressive.
So Ken, we should ask our friends in the collecting world to pay for us to go places.
We should. We definitely should.
Anyway, that's food for thought.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I was going to ask for your side as well. So go ahead.
So we didn't actually meet until 2018, right? 2017 in Monaco. The part of that initiative there, a man named Patrick Macellis pays for some specific young philatelists as well to go attend a very prestigious stamp show in Monaco called Monaco Phil. So Charles and I actually met for the first time in Monaco in 2017 and kept in touch since then. And then when the pandemic hit, we kind of reached out to each other. And
Michael's being too humble. I was in the car driving to look at a stamp collection, and I get a Facebook message from Mike. We'd met a couple of times. He'd come by my office for lunch. We knew each other, and we're friendly with each other. But I get a Facebook message from Michael. Hey, can I give you a call? So I send him my cell phone number as I'm driving. And he calls and he pitches this idea for a podcast. And I said, that sounds good to me. I didn't want to let on that I'd never actually listened to a podcast before. I didn't really know what they were. I was like, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Because it's the pandemic. You're just looking for things to do. You're looking for ways to pass the time. I wasn't going into the office every day. So again, it was not a joint idea. I want to be very clear. So it's Michael, and I'm just along for the ride. So please don't be so humble, Michael.
I love that you admitted that you didn't know what a podcast was.
I immediately Googled how do you listen to pod? I didn't realize there was like an Apple application. I'd never noticed the app before. I very quickly briefed myself on podcasts, and then I wrote him back and I was like, "Hey, I'm thinking more about this pod." And then I was like an expert on podcasts. I listened to like an hour's worth, and I was like, I had all these ideas. But no, all credit goes to Michael for the idea.
That's the advantage of texting, because you'd be like, yeah, I know. What the hell is he talking about?
Exactly. Yeah. I was like trying to impress him with like podcast knowledge. But yes, that was how it started. It was, I'd been going to shows, Michael, you think you were just starting to look to go to more shows right as all of this broke out, which was unfortunate. And it just gave us a chance to connect with people we hadn't seen in a while. We have Michael and I have a lot of mutual friends in the hobby. And I think a lot of it was we just missed some of these people and thought, let's touch base with them. But also to track down new people who maybe live on the other side of the planet or have a job where we don't really interact with them. Because we didn't want it to be, and I think we both agreed on this early on, that we didn't want it to be just stamp collectors and just people that we were used to seeing at stamp shows. We wanted to, attract a more diverse, people who are sort of stamp adjacent. So we spoke to, one of the PR spokesmen for the USPS, and we've spoken to college professors who use the mail in their teaching. One of them uses the mail to teach American literature. How did literature and mail interact? They're very sort of offbeats, maybe not the right word, but interesting approaches to the hobby that Michael and I, we sort of get blinders on. I think we're so involved in the hobby on such a regular basis, and it was fun to get to hear all these differing viewpoints and perspectives. People who you might not think are collectors, or all sorts of different things. So that was sort of the genesis of it. Was let's just hop on Zoom and talk to people when we can't go anywhere.
That's cool, and I love like the thought process behind it, like meeting people. Since Kent and I started this show, and to be honest, we're only on episode 31, I think. So yeah, 31.
31.
We didn't know 3/4 of the people until we started reaching out. Like we wouldn't have known name. I knew of name, but not as well as we got closer with them because of the show. And I wouldn't have known Dennis, who's watching right now, and a few other people. So we've expanded our knowledge base substantially, right? And at the same time, we've gained a serious number of friends, which is also
cool. Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
Well, and I was gonna say, Michael and I go to a stamp show, and it's fun to meet like the people who comment on YouTube, and they come up to we actually interviewed a guy in San Francisco who had been commenting on all of our videos, and we saw him, and we were like, will you talk to us? Will you come on for it? So it's fun to have that sort of interaction. And I'll also say that again, I knew Michael, I liked Michael, we were friends, I would say. But this has really brought us together as well, and it's been Michael and his wife Kaylee have become two of my closest friends through this podcast. So that's been another fun element to it as well. I don't think Michael and I would have been forced to talk to each other as much as we have if we weren't involved in a project like this, and that's been a lot of fun.
It's actually, my wife is kind of concerned because I get giddy with talking to all my collectible friends, and my friends are all over the world. And it's like, what are you doing? I'm going to go talk to my buddy Darcy out west. I got to go. It's like, what is wrong with you? And I tell her, I'm your safest husband in the world. I don't leave the house. I just need a phone, the internet, and looking up cards and talking to my friends. That's all I need. So when you started a show and channel, the two of you wanted to try and get guests for your show. To kind of tell us, like, what did people feel like when you reached out to them and said, you want to be our guest? Like, were they flattered? Were they unsure? Were they like, who are these two crackerjacks? What are these guys doing?
Yeah, so we reached out to people we knew. We started with Alex, who kind of put us together. And then we reached out to people that we'd met before, and they were incredibly supportive. We got nothing but a ton of support from the people who didn't really understand what it was we were doing, didn't understand what we were trying to accomplish. But they, we owe kind of everything to them because they were the ones that started it. And they were such interesting people that they got people kind of hooked on the idea as well.
I'm sure you guys have experienced the same thing where once you have 10, 20 episodes, it's really easy to write someone and say, here's what we do.
That's true.
Lay it out. But yeah, those first couple of emails because Michael and I hadn't even really formulated what we wanted it to be. We were like, we're just going to talk for 30 minutes, an hour. We don't, however long the conversation goes. So those first couple of people who joined us without knowing what we were doing, that was really very touching in a way that they were just willing to say yes to us, even though we were making it up as we went along. So, and again, then once you get a couple under your belt, you sort of, I think, get a bit more confidence and you have a body of work to show, and it becomes less awkward to cold call people.
Yeah, it's also, I have a whole new respect for journalists and researchers who do this professionally. It's not easy to get up there. And the first shows, and we'll talk about this later, but the first couple of shows, I'm pretty sure I sound like a bumbling idiot trying to figure out, fumbling over my questions and trying to figure out what was going on. But now I feel definitely more comfortable and definitely reaching out to people. And Kent does most of the reaching out, but it's easier, way easier now you have 31 shows in, right? And for you, I think it's 67?
67.
Yeah, we just celebrated our 1 year anniversary a couple of weeks ago. So we've had a couple of extra episodes mixed in. So yeah, we just celebrated a year recently, which simultaneously feels like we've been doing this for 10 years.
Wait till you are 10 years from now, and you'll be like, you'll be like, wow, I sound way different. So the one thing that's fairly obvious is both of you are very young. Kent and I are at that point where midlife crisis is either setting in or coming very soon, or has passed us and we haven't seen it.
It's funny, in stamp collecting, you guys would be the next youngest after Michael.
Yeah, exactly.
And a Grecian formula in my beard. And it's funny because I watched one of your YouTube shows, And I'm watching through, and I'm like, there's a lot of older guys in that hobby. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's good to see younger people, because all collectibles in general, forget trading cards or whatever it may be, in order for the collective hobbies to grow, you need to bring in people who are younger to enjoy it. So the fact that you two are both young, that helps the game plan overall. So, like I said, we mentioned you're young, and you talked about stamp collecting as an older person's hobby. How do you use your medium to make sure you educate younger people to come in, or get more younger people to come in to kind of grow the hobby from that, the podcasting and your angle? I'll start with you, Charles.
So I think that stamp collecting is unique in a way, because baseball cards are always going to be cool to kids. Kids are always going to love baseball cards. Coins, you're always going to use. Everyone's going to know what a coin is. But with stamps, I feel like for much of the hobby's history, your early exposure to stamps was using them, was licking them and sticking them on an envelope, and that sort of gave people a familiarity with them from a very young age. So when it came time to collect something, it was natural, because you'd been looking at stamps and tasting stamps and using stamps on a very regular basis. They're not, to most people, I would say they're not inherently as fun as a baseball card. When you get like a Mike Trout card, that's more fun than a stamp with the Statue of Liberty on it. So I think that's one of the biggest problems facing the hobby right now, is you don't have that initial exposure. People today don't know even what a stamp costs, because now they're forever stamps and it changes all the time with Congress. So I think that lack of early exposure is one of the biggest things we have to overcome. But Michael and I have talked about this youth fellowship. We are huge supporters of this program. We're actually planning on hopefully sponsoring a youth fellow next year. I think that programs like that, a lot of kids are interested in collecting stuff. People are forever, or whether hobbies are getting older or whatnot, they're going to be born with that gene. They're going to have a natural inclination to collect. And I think it's really about and then likewise, there's always going to be people who have no interest in collecting. There's people who you couldn't turn into a stamp collector or a card collector no matter how much you try. Yeah. So I think it's about identifying sort of the high potential youths and providing them with the resources that they need to be able to fully explore the hobby. So for, I think that, a lot of teachers try to incorporate stamps into their lesson plans, or at a stamp show, they'll have like Michael said, a youth corner where people, kids can fill a bucket with stamps and take it home. But I think the more important thing, rather than just casting a wide net and trying to turn everyone into a stamp collector, what Michael and I are trying to do whenever we meet a young person who shows that, the spark has to be there naturally, and it's up to the hobby to provide the kindling to allow it to. But I'm not sure you can create a stamp collector in a test tube necessarily. There has to be some natural inclination. So again, that's where Michael and I sort of come in, and hopefully people see us and realize that it's not just a bunch of old guys, and you can be young and successful and have a great time in the hobby, no matter what age or gender or whatnot. Stamp collecting has a reputation, I would say, that's a bit unfortunate, that it's an old, stodgy, not a cool hobby by any means. When I tell people what I do for a living, I get laughs more often than not. I've embraced that. I totally get that, but I hope Michael and I can sort of change that perception a little bit.
For sure. Yeah. So go ahead, Michael. Give your perspective.
No, I mean that raises some incredible points. I mean, thinking some of the greatest philatelists that we know came into the hobby specifically because they received mail that they thought was interesting. Not the mail itself, but Wade Sadi, someone we interviewed very early on, told us that he was brought into the hobby specifically because he kept receiving envelopes with the Liberty series on it. So,
which was a series of stamps in the 1950s and 60s that's very popular amongst collectors.
Yeah. So that's what brought him into the hobby, and now he's one of the most prominent, successful professional philatelists of our time. It's weird to say, but he is, and that's what brought him in. And then you see countries like Iceland who get rid of stamps entirely. So what you think of, they're not issuing stamps anymore. So how is that medium for bringing in new collectors in Iceland is completely out the window?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how big this news story was outside of the stamp world, but Iceland stopped issuing new postage stamps. Iceland said we're losing money on stamps, everything's going to be, printed meters and like the Pitney Bowes meters and everything. So Iceland is a stamp-free country these days.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really weird. Okay.
It sounds kind of funny, but stamp-free world. I get what you're saying. But there's a couple of things you both touched on. So one is, so a lot of people focus on kind of the wrong thing. Like, we need the youth in the hobby. You need the youth in the hobby, but you need the desire needs to be there. There needs to be a kind of understanding what the mentality of a collector. A collecting mentality is a bit of a OCD, right? You have a little bit of that, and you push it into the direction of either stamp collecting or trading cards. The other thing that we try to do on this show is show, there are a lot of prominent women who collect trading cards. So it's not just men's job to collect cards. And our job as men is to kind of show that it isn't just all men. There's women in this hobby too. They deserve equal treatment and respect. And you guys are doing that from a youth perspective and showing, different diversities in that point of view, right? So an inclusive nature. So you have that idea, we have that idea, and collectively, pardon the pun, we'll do that together as a group as we continue to do what we do best on podcasts and whatnot. I'm glad to hear you guys talk about that, because that's important. I think a lot of people look at, like, I just want to make a quick buck and get out, but you got to have more people spending those quick bucks to keep it alive, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, stamp collecting has this image of being, not going to lie, a bunch of old white guys at a stamp show. And I hope that our guests have done some small part to disprove that mentality. And
they will. You just need to, the advent of, I'm going to call it a positive benefit of COVID, it forced us all to go online and expand the horizons and see the world for what it is and who it can be. So, we wouldn't have met people. We wouldn't have been able to impart our nature on people. These videos are forever. They're always going to live on YouTube, right? Even long after we're gone, YouTube's still going to be there, and they're going to find this video. Whenever you have children or you get married, your kids are going to be like, oh, what did daddy do? Oh, let's go tell he's on YouTube. Let's check this out, right? It's like a ancestry.ca kind of thing. It's like you get to see your legacy, and you're doing an important service for your hobby. So I thank you for that.
We're having fun. We're trying to give back. We've had so many people who are generous to us, who have supported us. Yeah. When my first stamp show, I thought I knew a lot more than I did. And I sort of went in, thinking, and the people who took time, and Michael will tell you the same thing. The people who you spent the time with us and sat down with us and explained things, even though we were nothing really. We've had a lot of very generous people impact our lives. And if we can provide a similar role to just a couple of people, everything we do is worth it.
Yeah, awesome. Exactly.
So go ahead, Kent. I just realized we're at 37 minutes. We haven't even gotten through 1/10 of our questions. So this is how good a good conversation goes. So go ahead, Kent.
So gentlemen, comparatively speaking, if you had to compare episode number 1 to the very first, from the very first to the latest episode, which is number 67, how do you both feel after the completion of episode number 1, and what have you both learned along the way to your latest episode?
Michael?
I mean, feeling very different. I remember specifically after episode 1 thinking that was pretty good. I'm not sure.
I thought, we nailed it. Like,
Good answer.
In my mind, it sounded just like the podcasts that I was listening to. NPR produced podcast. I was like, that's what Michael and I just did. I think we've really learned a lot about the medium. We've incorporated more show and tell. People will share their screen and give us a peek into their collection or their jobs. I think we've really and the other thing that we've been able to do is we've done episodes where we're in person, which is as much fun as it is to hop on Zoom with someone. I've gone up to Michael's office and he came down to New York, and we've had some great experiences and at stamp shows. And I think that's one way that it's grown as well. We were sort of, because of COVID, we were locked into a routine.
Right.
You log on, you talk to someone, we record our little intro and outro. I want to give a shout out to Michael's sister, Claire, who does all of the editing and makes our episodes sound a lot better than they have any business sounding. But I think that we've really figured out how to utilize the podcast medium in a much better way. where it's not just log on, log off. It's I think we're trying to just mix things up a little bit.
When we started with episode 1, we really had no plans to do any in-person, go to shows, view stamps, view collections, break down collections, interview people in person. We didn't have any plans for that. We just thought, yeah, we'll log on to Zoom, we'll do this. And we didn't know we knew we wanted to do something, but we didn't really have a, long-term goal. And now I think we really do. We have, we're planning episodes out for November, December, where we're visiting people at their actual houses. We're talking to them about their collections. It's the feeling is a lot different from episode 1 to episode 67 to now, where we're at a stamp show talking to actual collectors, just walking around with a mic. It feels a lot different than my list of questions that I started off with.
To be quite honest, and I tell clients this all the time, I wish I could burn episode 1 because I don't think it sounded good at all.
I don't think I've actually gone back and listened to episode 1 since we did it.
I have. I've gone back, and it's like a memory. Like, don't do this. Don't ever do that.
For me, it is still that perfect piece of podcasting that I was, and it'll always be that way in my brain.
Yeah, because our guest was someone we hold so near and dear to ourselves. So, and he's an incredible speaker. And he nailed it. So we didn't even need to be there.
Awesome. Yeah, our first guest was a very prominent figure in our trading card hobby. His name is Billy Celio. He did us a huge favor. He didn't have to. He helped us out and was our first guest. Poor guy sat through 2.5 hours of us asking questions.
Dude, it was like 3.5 hours.
It's a 3.5 hours, and it was about 3 hours too long. It's like, so we've learned since then that we need to keep it to about an hour and a bit, hour and a half max. Because after about an hour and a half, your brain just starts to melt. It's just like you just can't keep it together. Sorry, Kent, go ahead, buddy.
No worries. So me and we particularly love this quote that you often quote, Michael, and it's by Dr. Shell Gans about getting new people into the hobby. And her quote was, "If we want to bring in more philatelists, we have to stop talking to only collectors." What is it about this simply a powerful sentence that resonates with the both of you?
So with me, it was the context meant a lot, because at the moment when she said it, she was talking about building exhibits for the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. So she was talking about, because that's what she used to be curator of the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. So she was talking about building exhibits that were tailored not only to collectors, but to people walking in off the street, to try and bring them in and show them that postal history can be interesting, stamps can be interesting, but that you can learn history through stamps. So it meant a lot to me as a quote, specifically because she was talking about, it's about exposure. It's not just about we need to target these people and bring them into the hobby, grab them in by the collar and just, show them, hey, collect stamps. It's showing people that it's interesting. And then the people who have that collecting gene, like Charles had mentioned, will get hooked. So it was, you need to just stop advertising to only people who already collect this material and show the people who don't that there's things that they may be interested in that they haven't experienced yet.
And a lot of people will collect things just related to their profession or related to the town where they were born. And yeah, you don't have to be a stamp collector in sort of the traditional sense, but I think, Cheryl's spot on about that, because a lot of you just think it's, you lick a little hinge and stick it on the back of the stamp, and then you put the stamp in your album and you just try to fill in every gap. And that's that. And that's such a small segment of stamp collecting. And Michael mentioned Cheryl worked for the National Postal Museum. They do great things. They've got an exhibit opening up, I want to say early next year, April or so, that's about baseball and stamp collecting.
Oh.
They've got items on loan from the Museum of American History. They've got items on loan from Cooperstown. And it's sort of telling the intertwined stories of baseball and stamps and how they've intersected throughout the years. And that's how you interest people. You don't, stick a stamp album in their hands and force them to fill in all the gaps. You almost have to, I hate using the word trick, but you have to get people to be stamp collectors without,
without them knowing.
It's like
the image of stamp collecting is very isolated and boring to an extent. But there's so many other ways to go about the hobby, and I think that's what Cheryl, through her career and her various roles, has done better than just about anyone.
It's like show me I'm stamp collecting without showing me I'm stamp collecting. It's like that TikTok.
100%. Yes. Even my mother never collected stamps in her life, and she went to a couple of shows with me, and she started collecting cats on stamps, just domesticated.
Oh, really?
And now she's got hundreds of stamps, and I go to a stamp show, and she's like, "Hey, can you track down these stamps from Poland that have cats on them?" And she's getting into it. Doesn't necessarily care about stamps per se, but she loves, some of them are silly and some of them are really awkward photos of cats, and some of them are just beautiful engravings of cats. And she can appreciate it because of her love of cats. It has nothing to do with the fact that they're stamps, really. And I think that's a really important way of getting people involved.
Yeah. Topical collecting like that, cats on stamps, is a massive part of Philately, that they have societies not only to embrace all topical collecting, but the Cats on Stamp Society, things like that. And they have exhibits as well, specific exhibits for topical collecting. And it's massive in the hobby. It's a huge demographic.
So one thing I will say is, the language that you're using to describe your hobby, it's very, what's the word, intellectual, right? So you're using topical and language like that. That's something that's a bit different than our subculture. Our subculture is, or hobby culture, is riddled in idioms and things that people don't understand unless you're in the hobby. So like when you talk about, you're very elegant in how you explain some of the things, and it does sound elegant. For example, you're going to Monaco, like, to go to a show. Like, we're going to some backwoods town flea market.
Oh, trust me, there's plenty of that in stamps too.
Yeah, I'm sure. But it's interesting to hear just the dichotomy of language used. So that's also I play off and learn stuff like that as well. Mind you, in every one of our hobbies, there's the nice guys, the sleaze bags, and everyone else. So we deal with those as well. But I appreciate how you guys are explaining it. So I want to thank you for that. Again, I lost track.
I got one more to go before I turn it over to you, Amit.
Yeah.
So on your second latest episode entitled Tiffany Talk, I'm going to quote a few things. So Charles, you mentioned thinking outside the box, which happens to be the motto of our show. And Michael, you mentioned being inclusive, building a sense of community, and sharing people's stories. These are very important taglines for our show as well. For yourselves, what's the importance of thinking outside the box, being inclusive, building a sense of community, and sharing people's stories mean for you and your show?
So I'll let you take the inclusivity, Michael. I'll take thinking outside the box if that works. But for me, perfect. Stamp collecting, one of the things that drew me to the hobby is the history and this great legacy of the hobby's been around since the 1850s, really. Since there were stamps, there have been people collecting them. So on the one hand, I do love all of that sort of baggage that comes with the hobby. My company that I work for was founded in 1940. I love that. I love being able to put established 1940 on my letterhead and whatnot. But I feel like that's simultaneously a blessing and a curse. So on the one hand, it's great that our hobby is steeped in tradition. You talk about the language. It is, it was always called the king of hobbies and the hobby of kings. And I think there's a lot of good that comes out of that. I feel like that can also be just as alienating and sort of restrictive. Because if we just keep doing things the way they've been done, there's a lot of things that may have worked at a stamp show in 1920 that don't work at a stamp show in 2020. And if we keep, just relying on the tradition and the history and the heritage of the hobby, I don't think it'll continue to survive in a 21st century world. So, Michael and I don't think it's that revolutionary to do a podcast, but it sort of is in the stamp world. This isn't, there's other great people making YouTube videos or making TikToks or Instagrams. And I do love to see more and more of that. Like every month, I feel like we meet someone new just online. But for me, that's what thinking outside the box is about. And to a lot of people, the catch-all solution is just, I'll make a Facebook page. for your stamp club, for your stamp.
Oh, sure, right.
Just make a Facebook page. And I Michael and I, at least myself, I don't really remember the world before Facebook that well. And I know that it's not just this one size fits all solution that you make a Facebook page. So I hope that by, at times when Michael and I are running around a stamp show, I kind of feel like part investigative journalist, part TV host, all sorts of things. And I think that, we're just sort of throwing everything against the wall and seeing what sticks and seeing what people respond to. Michael and I did an episode last year where we just gave people a tour of our respective offices. Sort of ran around filming, hey, here's where I work. And I didn't really understand why we were doing that. I think Michael suggested it. And I was like, this isn't good content. And I think we've gotten more comments about that episode than anything else we've done. And the ones that I thought should have been huge.
Right.
I liked that, but it wasn't the best. So I think that's how we're trying to think outside the box. Again, we want to honor the history of the hobby, and that is a huge draw.
Right.
And I love following in the footsteps of a lot of great people. But at the same time, we're just trying to figure out new ways to draw people in or make people feel more involved. And that's really what it means to me.
Mm-hmm.
Michael?
Sorry, go ahead, Michael. You first.
Yeah, the inclusivity is massive, because without that, I wouldn't have met Charles. I wouldn't be where I am today. I went to my first stamp show when I was 21 years old, I think, and it was just one of those Borscht shows. And I didn't really know what I was doing. It was really, I was a fish out of water. And I sat down at a booth and I asked for a book to look at some stamps. And I didn't really have an intention of buying them. I just wanted to talk to people, to connect, because my father and I have an online business. So we would only sell material online. We didn't go to shows, or we didn't have customers come in. So I wanted to connect with people. And a Borscht show, when you're not intending to buy anything, isn't really the place to do that. That you go there to buy. So when I finally applied to the YPLF, and they sent me to the Milwaukee show, and I sat down with some of the people that they introduced me to, it really struck me that there's people who want other people in the hobby, and not just for a monetary reason, not because they're trying to sell you something, but because they want to share their collections, or they want to see your collection, or they want to see what you can do in the future if you become interested in X, Y, and Z. Or if you start doing this, you become a member of this organization within the hobby. They want to see you grow within it. So without that kind of camaraderie in the beginning, I wouldn't have continued in the capacity that I've continued with in the hobby. It would have looked a lot different for me, particularly. And I want to just be able to share that with people, because without that, I'd still be sitting behind a computer selling things to people on eBay, just the way we do now with, our 15 employees. We've got a large building, and we don't have a storefront. We wouldn't have met anyone. But now we're going to shows, we're meeting people, we're interviewing people on this podcast, and it's a much different experience. And I just want to make sure that we don't leave any philatelist behind. We don't want people to have an experience where they kind of feel that they can't be involved in the hobby in the same way.
Right.
You're also there's one thing. So I was reading a quote, and I'm gonna kind of segue it into our thinking, right? So I was talking to a couple of parents, and they're saying younger parents, the reason why their kids do a little bit better in some sense is they're letting them take risks. But older parents, they're more cautious, right? They've been around, they know what the bumps and bruises, so they don't take as many risks with their children. So the fact that you're younger and you're taking risks to kind of go out beyond what you're thinking is kind of proof in the pudding of that thought process. Had you been, I can tell you right now, me being 47 compared to 37, compared to 27, compared to 17, I was like 17-year-old me would have done this in a heartbeat, right? 47-year-old me was like, it took me a year before I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to do this. I wasn't sure I was qualified enough to take the risk, right? So the fact you have to take a risk, and there's a very famous talk show host, Steve Harvey, Family Feud. he had there's a YouTube clip of him that went viral, which is he was telling people like until you jump and you don't take a risk, you have to jump. If you don't jump and fall and bump and bruise yourself, you'll never know. But you have to jump. So the fact that you're doing that, I think Kent and I are trying, even though age is nothing but a number, but we're trying something different. It's you have to try. So I think I like the fact that you guys are thinking that. So kudos to you for doing that.
Thanks.
So stamps these days, especially in North America, have evolved from. Actually, someone asked a question about this, and it's relative to this. So, Nostradamus, hold your horses a second. You'll get somewhat of an answer, and the answer is no. But anyways, stamps these days in North America have evolved from licking to self-adhesive to postal general stamps. So, just so you're aware, there's the little stickers they could peel off and stick to envelope, which for someone like me who used to do eBay is a revolutionary thing because licking stamps sucks, especially when you do that many packages. So I wanted to talk to you about how the evolution of that came to be, how did it affect your stamp collecting in general, and just your general thoughts on that evolution and innovation.
Yeah, so for much of their histories, you'd lick a stamp. It had a water-activated gum on the back, which was very convenient for stamp collectors because the same water that activated the gum when you licked it and stuck it, you could just soak it in, lukewarm water, warm water. Drop a dish soap. You put the stamp while it's still on the envelope in there, and it just lifts right off. It just floats right off, and you can have that stamp. The introduction of self-adhesive stamps was very convenient from a shipping standpoint. Absolutely. My office manager laments whenever a lot of stamp dealers still cover the outside of their packages in old stamps. And whenever I suggest that we do this, Allison's not thrilled. She'd much rather stick one stamp on it. But it did hurt the hobby in the sense that it is much harder to get a self-adhesive stamp off. The water no longer deactivates the gum. So, when I was starting to collect, there's all sorts of like orange oil, things you can buy at Home Depot that probably shouldn't be inhaling. That you can use to get the adhesive off. But even then, it's you're still left with the stickiness on the back of the stamp. So a lot of people nowadays will just cut it, be careful not to trim the perforations off. Just leave it on the paper that it's on because it's easier than trying to get it off. So yeah, the switch from water activated to self-adhesive, I get it from a practicality standpoint, but I still sort of mourn it from a collector standpoint.
Well, there's also Amazon, and so there's a lot less people sending mail, so that's a proven thing. But there's a lot more people sending packages, but those are metered mostly, like Amazon, and whatnot. Right?
Exactly. You got a package from a stamp dealer or collector when a box will just be plastered in sheets of postage stamps. So,
well, I know
there's still some people keeping it alive.
I know when I buy stuff on eBay and they're trading cards, there are stamps that I know this guy used a glue stick. He's peeled them off other envelopes that haven't been canceled, and he's glue sticking them to the package. And I can tell because I know the Canadian stamps, and I can see they're like the universal ones they can use. They have no price on it. It's just like
the forever ones.
Yes, but they changed the artwork, and I'm like, that artwork was from like 5 years ago. This guy clearly saved all of his envelopes, and then, put them over a steaming kettle, and then glue stick them to the boxes. It's funny because I do remember as a kid, like my parents who would send out Christmas cards, and I got that job of licking the stamp. I hated that job, and then I remember another comical. So I hated that. My dad used to laugh at me because like, hey, you got to go through the ritual. I did as he is a kid. The other one is, and I still have this thought in my head, and it's kind of disgusting, but it still makes me laugh to this day. That we had this old lady that used to work at the post office when I was growing up. They had the roller ball with the water, and this water had been in there for God knows how long, right? And you could tell because it was like not looking right. And she's just like, psst, psst. And I'm like, oh my God, do not put that in your mouth. Do not put that in your mouth. And I don't know why she did that, even though she used the water off the roller ball, right? She's like, water off the roller ball, stick it, and then on the envelope. And I'm like, I am not touching that thing with a 10-foot pole. So all kinds of thoughts go through my head at that. So I'm kind of thankful for stickers for that point of view. Michael, I'll give you a chance to chime in.
No, I mean the Charles answered that perfectly. The only thing that I'd mention on top of that is that when you had stamps in the past before self-adhesive, the hinging, the gum on the back really mattered. So if someone had hinged the stamp previously, it really would reduce the value of the stamp.
I don't want to interrupt, but this is probably a foreign concept to card collectors. A hinge is a little piece of sort of gummed paper. So you didn't want
wax
to lick
paper,
the stamp. Yeah, you don't want to lick the stamp in
okay.
your album. So you'd use a little folded piece of paper that had gum on one side. So you would attach one side of it to the stamp and the other side of it to your stamp album, which allowed it to sort of float freely.
Looked like a door hinge.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
It was still attached, but that marred the gum on the back of a stamp. So stamps that escaped that fate and have the gum perfect as it was at the post office the day it was issued are more valuable than stamps where the gum on the back has been altered or disturbed in any way.
I find that interesting though, because back in the day, weren't they telling you to use the hinge?
Yes.
Yes.
Which is why the value of the never hinge stamps has gone up so significantly. Is they were never supposed to survive in this format. They were never, this was the way you collected stamps. You stuck the hinge on the back. So they inadvertently created a whole new class of rarities.
That is really interesting. That is really interesting.
But with self-adhesives, that's completely
not
even a
moot point.
Not even a thing. Yeah.
Huh.
Sorry, I have a stamp book. I was actually going to look at what you're talking about. Now I know what you mean. Okay. Cool. So the other thing I wanted to ask you is, for most of us that collect trading cards, we have issues. Well, it's a bit of a sore topic right now because of the advent of digital and the speed that transactions happen online. A lot of these pricing catalogs that we used to refer to are no longer valid, right? When they print the issue, literally the day they printed, if eBay spiked, then the values in the book were no good. But I wanted to kind of ask, because I know in stamps there's Scott's catalog and various other resources to look up values of stamps. So can you talk about where would someone go to look up information about stamps, their value, and is eBay completed auction the way to do it, or should you use online references? Talk about that.
So
Michael,
Scott is the standard for American philatelists. They have a U.S. specialized. They have a classics that does 1840 to 1940, where they have massive 6 volume, but now that's part 1 A and B, part 2 A and B. So I think it's 12 volume now.
So to get all of the Scott catalogs for all of the world, 1840 to present day, you're looking at about 14 different books.
Oh wow!
Wow!
Like kind of phone book size books too.
Yeah.
And do they
reissue them?
Did they update this every year?
Every year.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Every year they issue new ones. So those are they have price points in there where all the stamps are priced at very fine condition, no, extremely fine condition. XF is catalog is XF, and then they kind of give you go a percentage down off of that. So some people are leaning more towards using online resources, but Scott is the standard. If someone has a price in the title on an auction catalog, on an online auction, it's either a Scott catalog number and Scott catalog price, or if they're mentioned specifically a different catalog like Scanley Gibbons, Bale, Yvert, Michelle, things like that, they'll have different prices for specialized stamps. So,
those catalogs are all sort of specific to a country. So in the U.S., it's Scott. In Great Britain, it's Stanley Gibbons. In France, it's Yvert or
Yvert,
blanking on the other one. In Germany, it's Michel. So every country has its own catalog. But the other confusing thing is that whatever the Scott catalog lists is more often than not what you're going to be able to get for your stamp. So again, this assumes a certain condition. This assumes sort of the perfect storm of sale. Whereas certain countries that are very hot these days, such as People's Republic of China, You can sell something for the full Scott catalog value. Other countries like France or Canada, maybe you're lucky to get 5 to 10 to 15% of the catalog value. And it varies from country to country, and it varies, depending on market trends. So I would say that eBay completed listings is probably the safest bet if you want the real market value of a stamp.
Funny that.
Yeah, I mean, Scott is very useful for identifying them, but the values can be a bit misleading. With people who call us and they'll say, I've got a stamp that catalogs $200, and I have to explain to them that it's got a corner ripped off of it, and it has no gum, and it's got all these things that you sort of start with the best case scenario and then work your way down from there.
So you guys know how you have the PW on eBay's completed listings, you guys have PWCC now that has a website where you can search all of eBay's completed listings for all of trading cards.
Right.
We kind of ourselves developed a similar thing called Stamp Market Index, where we have all of eBay's completed listings for the past 14 years for stamps. So it's not as PWCC's has a lot more involved. It's very well built out. There's a lot to it. I've seen with graphs and everything like that. Ours is simply you want to find something, type in the title, and we'll find it for you by the year. We'll show the photo. We'll show the price. So I utilize that a lot. Of course, I'm biased because we built it, but I find that very helpful. But Scott is definitely, when pricing material, Scott kind of is the Scott catalog value is what you put in. That's the standard.
So you said, so one question I want to ask you and remind me about the app, or sorry, your Stamp
Market Index. Yeah.
Is that an app that you can download on your phone?
It's not. It's just the a website. So stampmarketindex.com, much like the PWCC market.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I will check that out and definitely make sure I look at that. The other thing I wanted to ask you is, now, I had made a joke earlier about the fact that some of our card shows are in flea markets and stuff like that, but there are, because of COVID and the advent of very influential businessmen who come in and realize sports card is a good asset, a collectible asset. So we've got more influential people in the hobby, people who have money, well-heeled clients. So they'll spend the money to buy certain things. So the question I have for you is, when you mentioned that, in Asia, some people will pay full market rate versus North America, they won't. Is it because the demographic that they're appealing to is well-heeled, or is it the fact that they can't get those issues in those certain countries and they're less willing to be finicky on the price? Like, what is it we noticed from that point of view?
I think if you asked 10 people, you'd probably get 10 different answers to that question.
Yeah.
I think one big thing about the Asian market is I would say the Asian market is sort of where the American market was a couple of decades ago.
Okay.
So there was not a big stamp collecting community for a very long time. The oldest American auction houses go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. The oldest auction house in Hong Kong is actually a sister company of ours, and they weren't founded until 1970. So I think that it's a much more modern than what, and Great Britain goes back even further than the US. So I think there's a lot more passion and enthusiasm and excitement, and hence higher prices, because it's still much more of a fresh phenomenon. I feel like they're not as jaded's not the right word, but it still feels new to them. So I think that generates a lot of the high prices, that it hasn't been done before.
Jaded is a good way to say things, because we all know those collectors. Like, they think the world is falling apart and there's a nuclear bomb going to hit Earth and stamps will disappear, and there's and as soon as they come up with an innovation and like a 3D print stamp, they'll be like, that's it, 2D's dead, like something like that, right? So I say quickly hi to some people. So Mastradamus, I answered your question. I think this is Richie. It's
Richie. It is Richie. Yes, it's Richie.
He's a collector from New York. They were good friends of ours. Kent has a fan, so I'm going to say, hey, Kent. So Name has made a comment here. When I was a kid, before the days of the 9-slot pages came into my life, the 9-slot pocket pages for cards, we would use photo albums with the adhesive to hold our cards. The photo album pages had adhesive on them. Is that similar to the stamp?
Yeah, so when I saw this comment, I was going to say we still see stamp albums that are
Yeah.
on those horrible old photo albums where they have like
Really? Wow.
the mylar that
Yeah.
you peel back.
Yeah.
You literally just stick which to a stamp that just
They
destroys.
would destroy it. Yeah.
There's really
Yeah.
nothing you can do to salvage a stamp like that. But yeah, we still see people who collected stamps that same way. They would just stick them straight to the adhesive photo album.
Charles and Michael, this might be a dumb question. So if the stamp is stuck on one of those old photo albums, you can't even soak that off?
You can. Sometimes the adhesives that were used would discolor the stamp.
Oh, discolor. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So and if you want, and if you soak it, you're also inherently destroying the gum. So a lot of times, what we will try to do is you can actually put them in the freezer, and sometimes that's enough to loosen the adhesion.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
We have a lot of old wives' tales in terms of how to fix things. Like people are like, hey, if you turn upside down and you put it on Mars, it'll be this condition.
And it also depends on, is the stamp even worth saving? There's a lot of
true. That's true.
Cut your losses. It's not salvable. But you know, we get rare stamps sometimes where it's like performing CPR to get it off an album page. Or something.
Yeah.
Well, the good news, the interesting thing you said, which I learned, which is something I didn't know and can't mention this as well. The art of a stamp is that you have to destroy it to use it, and then you have to stop from being destroyed further to have the value in it. So it's like it's like you can't have your cake and eat it too. It's almost like a way of looking at it. So another similarity you have with collecting is Charles, you're more into the collectible side of things, and Michael, you have a company that does a lot of eBay transactions. So what is it like to how do you come across collections, and how you evaluate them, and what are some of the easy? Actually, this is not a fair question because I get asked this as well. How would you tell someone whether a collection is worth something or not? And do you get a lot of junk collections, and like how do you deal with all that?
So I work.
Do you want me to?
This is my least favorite part of the business, is like letting people down. I work for an auction house. So we get called all the time. There's very few auction houses left in New York City. New York used to be sort of the center of the stamp universe, and now it's spread out all over the country and all over the world. You know, when people in New York City and across the U.S. will call us, I've got my father's stamp collection, he passed away, or my husband's stamp collection, he passed away. And, you know, we usually try to, you know, we ask for pictures is usually the first line of defense. People think they have to photograph every single stamp in the collection. They don't. You can sort of get inside of a collector's brain, I feel, just by seeing a couple of cursory photos. You can tell, you know, whether something is worthwhile or not. We usually ask where they were purchasing stamps. If they were buying from a well-known dealer or an auction house, that's a lot different than if they were just clipping stamps off of envelopes that came in the mail. And the thing that I hate to have to convey to people, but I have to do it on a daily basis effectively, is that a lot of times if you didn't put money into your stamp collection, it's very difficult to get money out of your stamp collection. So if all you did was go to the post office and buy a mint sheet of stamps, you know, 3 cents, the whole sheet cost $1.50, you're not going to get much more than $1.50 out of that collection. Whereas if you were going to auction and spending $100 or $1,000 on a stamp, that's a stamp that will most likely have held its value. So, you know, everyone wants to find that diamond in the rough, and everyone wants to get rich quick, buy something at a thrift store and flip it for a lot of money. But the sad reality is that, again, unless you were actively putting money into your collection, odds are it can be great to inspire a new generation of collectors. Maybe, you know, we often tell people, donate it to a YMCA or a Boys and Girls Club or something like that, because it might spark that passion inside of somebody else. But you know, unfortunately, the vast majority of collections that we take a look at are not saleable, but do have sentimental and historical interest, I would say. You know, no stamp collection is worthless. It just depends on what your value of. If all you're looking for is money, then yeah, there's plenty of stamp collections that are worthless. But if you can appreciate the art and the history and the love that, you know, the labor that somebody put into a collection, then everything is valuable in its own way.
So one thing I've learned is if I see a collection and it's like I can tell right away from the color of the card, I'm like, oh no, it's going to be full of this 90s stuff. the junk wax era. We call it junk wax era. But I try to err on the side of, oh, this was really fun. Remember when so and so did this, and then it lessens the hurt. So I've used that.
Yeah, you have to come up with these little stories. Hey, this stamp was the first stamp printed, blah blah blah, and you sort of again, you're not if I was just in this from a purely financial standpoint, I would hate it. Just looking at things in terms of dollars and cents wouldn't do it for me, and I try to again convey that. And a lot of times, if somebody comes in wanting to sell, then the more I talk to them, they remember that they have a nephew who's maybe 10 years old, and maybe he'd be interested in carrying on his relative's collection. And again, you do have to soften the blow. And again, not everything is just money oriented. A lot of these things are intangible.
For sure.
Yeah.
So Michael, you want to take that?
No, I mean, that's the perfect answer. We had two people come in today that I looked at the collections. It wasn't quite something we could help them with. And we suggested they either give it to someone in the family, donate it to, there's a museum kind of near us called the Cardinal Spellman Museum in Weston, Mass, that takes donations, and they use the stamps to teach kind of youth, children, stuff like that. And then I tell them if they're not looking to donate it, if they don't have someone in the family, maybe they can go to a local club or a local show. And a collector will buy it directly off of them sometimes. I never throw a collection out. I never recommend any. People come in and they say, oh, if it's not worth $50, I'm just going to throw it out. I said, still don't do that, because there will be people who take it as a donation, and there'll be people who pay, $40, $20 for it. Even if that's not a lot to you, somebody will want this collection. No matter what it is.
You talk about how you can tell immediately when something's like all 90s cards. So when you look at a stamp collection, you can usually tell within a couple of seconds whether or not it's going to be worth, you sort of have to start thinking of how to break the bad news. So that's maybe my least favorite part of the job, is I will sit there going page by page, even though I know I'm not going to find anything.
Looking for something.
Exactly, something. And I'm like talking myself through the bad news. The whole time. Like, how am I going to, what tact am I going to use to break the bad news? So I just labor over every page, postponing the inevitable. Some people take it great. Other people less so. That's probably my least favorite part of the job.
I've had some pretty upset people in my life go through. I had one guy throw his binder right in the garbage at a show once. So
oh no!
I'm really sorry, but maybe you'll salvage the binder. That's all I can tell you. So, also one of the questions I wanted to ask you: have you ever heard or come across? You probably get this question 1,000 times. We get this question all the time. You ever found something really cool at a flea market, a really valuable stamp during your travels and looking for things in odd places?
Michael?
So it wasn't me, but I think about this story a lot. And it was there was a collector I knew at one of the first Milwaukee show I went to, the show in Milwaukee 2017 that I went to, where he was talking about his favorite find. So India issued a set in, I'm going to just completely guess the year. I think it's like 1957, the Gandhi set.
Okay. It was in late 40s?
1940?
No, I think it was late 40s. I think around 1948, I want to say.
Okay, 1948. So it had four values, three lesser values, and then the high value, which was the most valuable stamp in the set, was the 10 ruby. The lower values were all small, and then the 10 ruby was large. So he was going through just a dollar cover lot. So at stamp shows, some people will have these big cartons where every cover they just price at $1 because they don't go through everything and price it out. It's just everything in here is $1. So the set itself is about $300 if it's in mint condition, never hinged. If it's used, I think it's about $150 catalog value. But on first day cover, which is when the first day these stamps were issued, placed on a cover and then stamped, is incredibly rare. So he was going through the dollar cover lot and saw a full Gandhi set, the 1940, late 40 something, on
48. I just confirmed.
48. Okay, 1948 on first day cover for $1. And he was, I think something like that has to be worth about anywhere, depending on condition, anywhere from $600 to $900, I'd say. And for $1. So he was that story I like to think about a lot or tell a lot because I like that set, and he found it from a dealer selling something who didn't necessarily know what it was he had.
Wow.
We've had situations like that. Kent and I have found things, not in a huge money value.
Yeah, nothing earth shattering,
but stuff like, well, this is definitely more than $1. Or sometimes you have to point at them like, are you sure you really are selling it? Yeah, it's $1. Okay, I'll take it. So I don't feel as guilty. So some of the most famous and iconic. Actually, before I go there, we're at the hour and 20 mark. I want to make sure I respect your time because it is over that time. Are you cool to keep going for a little bit longer?
If we're not boring you guys, sure.
Okay. No.
Can I tell a quick hidden gem story? I don't.
Yes, please.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Just one of my what I think is an interesting story. I was digging through a box of envelopes in the office. I'll make this very brief. And it was junk. It was things that would sell for $0.25, nothing interesting. And then I saw during World War II, soldiers didn't have to put stamps on their mail. They had the privilege of sending mail for free because they were, fighting in World War II. Right. And there was a letter from a soldier in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And I didn't know why Oak Ridge sort of triggered. Does that name ring a bell to any of you guys?
Other than a really sad sack country band, that's all I know.
It did something for me. So I Googled Oak Ridge, and I found out it was where part of the Manhattan Project was based out of. At Los Alamos, New Mexico, at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And I found there were 2 letters. One of them dated like August 4th, and one of them dated August 8th, 1945, from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And they had the original letters inside of them. And the one that was dated August 4th was a soldier writing home to his wife. He said, "Honey, I'm sorry I've been very busy. I haven't been able to write you. I know you're probably getting frustrated by my silence, but it'll all make sense soon. Just bear with me for a couple of days." 2 days later, the first bomb is dropped on Japan. And the next letter was from a day or two after. He's writing his wife saying, "I'm sure you've seen the news by now. And I'm sure my absence for the last year makes a lot more sense since you know what I've been working on."
Wow.
He was on the Manhattan Project?
He was part of the Manhattan Project.
Wow.
And his first letter was very cagey. He couldn't tell his wife what he was doing. And then the curtain was lifted. And he could say, "This is what my life has been." And these were just tossed into a box of like junk letters. And it's a Manhattan Project scientist writing right before and after the dropping. And so I showed them to one of my colleagues who he's much more clinical the way he looks at this stuff. I tend to be much more sentimental and romantic with it. And I thought these were just the most amazing thing ever. And he goes, "I'm not sure they're worth anything." What do you mean? Like this is American history. Doesn't get any better than this. And we ended up selling them for I think $600 versus leaving a box that collectively would have sold for about $50. So that was my most exciting discovery. Was this small? Admittedly a small piece of American history, but history nonetheless.
But you know what? To you guys' point earlier, it's something that was telling a story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Story.
And I like the fact that you guys didn't dig deep for some big rich story. You drove into the drawer for a small victory, right? Which is what collecting is all about, right? The true collector doesn't care about the $1 million price tag. They just
I was going to say some of the things. I shouldn't say this as a business person. But some of the things we sell for $10,000 are, to me personally, not the most exciting. Versus the things we sell for $150 that have this great story. We had a postcard that was written the day President McKinley was assassinated in 1901, and somebody who was there wrote a little note on the back saying the president was assassinated today, and it only sold for I think like $75. And I was like, I don't know. To me, that's much more exciting than a $10,000.
We could do a whole show on World War and political history because I actually am interested, and so is Kent. I have a soft spot, and we actually interviewed a guy who does Civil War memorabilia. So I have a soft spot for Civil War stuff, and reading
That's a
letters
whole
online.
other conversation.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
We'd be here all night.
Stamps, actually, because I remember I watched the documentary. Stamps had a big part to play in the Civil War, and there's some collectible ones. Everything escaping me now. Literally, you guys just triggered this memory. I haven't watched this thing in like 10 years.
The history of stamps in the Civil War is fascinating because the North didn't want these stamps to be legal tender in the South, so they demonetized all stamps issued prior to 1861. They said they're not valid anymore, and you've got a window of like a week or 10 days where you could trade in your old stamps for new stamps, and after that date, your old stamps were just paper, which resulted in stamps issued prior to 1861 are therefore very rare in mint condition. Because who would have kept a piece of, you wanted to get your money's worth. But then the other interesting thing, stamps had been around for about 15 years when the war broke out. So a lot of people in the South were used to using stamps by this point. They had come to rely on stamps. And obviously the Confederate government has much more important things like moving troops and getting the railroads running. They don't care about postage stamps, but the people demanded postage. They didn't care about the way they wanted their stamps. So a lot of postmasters created their own postage stamps that were only recognized locally on the city level. And some of these stamps, only 1 or 2 or 10 of them exist, and they're hugely collectible and hugely valuable and a fascinating subset of the hobby. So
it is.
I don't mean to get off topic, but I could stuff.
No, this could be another topic, and I would love to do a stamp show, a collectible show about stamps, just about the Civil War, because I love that stuff very much. There's also, I'm really interested in the history of American flags, which are also related to the stamps. I'll save that for another.
Oh yeah,
but that one is, when I put 2 and 2 together, I was like, whoa, this is bizarre. Anyways, I will save that for another show. Wow, there's so much to talk about. Where do we start? So yesterday we started nerding out about the Jenny biplane plate. So I'm gonna say this 6 times straight. The inverted Jenny biplane plate block. I don't think I can say that again. We talked about how it's a sought after error, but then you highlighted a point that there is a modern error as well with that. So, error or non-error? I'll let you explain.
Well, here, so that's the.
Yeah, so I'll give the history.
Manufactured.
Yeah, so Michael, I'm going to tell the backstory of the regular stamp.
That's the 2013 one there.
Yeah, so for the 95th anniversary of that stamp in 2013, the inverted Jenny is the most famous stamp error of all time, arguably. This was the first airmail stamp issued in 1918. 2 colors, so it's got the red frame, the blue airplane in the middle. 1 sheet of 100, they accidentally printed the airplane upside down. These stamps are widely considered to be the most iconic and one of the most valuable stamps. So for the 95th anniversary, the post office recreated this stamp with a $2 denomination. And Michael, what else did the post office controversially do?
At the time, they also issued 100 uninverted Jennies. These packages, when they issued the stamps, they're all sealed, sealed on both ends. So you go in. Like a pack of trading cards. Yeah, you go in and you ask for the sheet. It's a 6 stamp, so it's $12. You go and you ask for the sheet, and they hand you the sealed envelope, and you open it, and in there is the sheet of inverted Jennies, $2 stamps, and then 100 issued also, randomly scattered throughout the United States, are uninverted Jennies, which were manufactured on purpose to be an homage,
sort of.
Yeah. And they came with certificates of authenticity in the package. You were still encouraged, if you wanted to mail them out to grading companies to get a second certificate of authenticity, but they didn't really need them for that. Some people sent them in to get graded. I've seen some on the market where people actually cut out the singles and then sent the singles in to go get graded. But yeah, they've sold at auction for, our company, Noble Spirit, actually sold 3 of them, but they sell anywhere from, I think the lowest value one sold was $30,000, and then the highest value was actually sold by us at $85,000. But other auction houses have sold them in between. I think Kelleher sold one for $65,000 or $58,000. they go for, but the thing is, they're not all found. So
They're
I
still
think
out there.
there's still 35, I think, or in the 30s or 40s that are still out there in the packaging. But now I don't believe you can buy the souvenir sheets from actual post offices anymore. You have to order them from USPS.com, and all of them are at one facility, but they're still out there.
You know what I'm doing after this show, right, Ken?
I have a friend who's
I'm going to try my luck.
I have a friend who's opened, I think, 7,000 of them and has yet to find one.
Yeah.
7,000, wow.
But we said yesterday, the advantages compared to trading cards is you can actually still use these.
Yeah.
You can sell them and they're still useful, right? So it's not like you're going to lose.
Yeah.
Right?
Can I tell two other very quick error stories from recent post office?
Yeah, we'd love to hear it. Yeah, for sure.
So there was a stamp issued in the 1960s for Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations. And the stamp was a black stamp or a brown stamp with a yellow background. And somebody, right as the stamp came out, found a sheet where the yellow background was inverted in relation to the stamps. And he thought, I've struck gold. He knew what the inverted Jenny sold for. Here's another equally unique sheet of stamps, and he felt like he'd hit the jackpot. The post office found out about this, and they didn't want one of their errors to reach this sort of notoriety or collectible status. So what they did is they announced they were actually going to issue the inverted stamp. So they issued millions upon millions of them.
Oh.
In order to make sure they would never become valuable. So they printed just as many inverted as they did regular. So that if you went to the post office, you could buy both of them in equal measure. So that was a way of the post office sort of covering themselves.
That's interesting.
Making sure they didn't, inadvertently create a rarity. The other interesting one, there was a sheet of stamps in, I think, 1995 called Legends of the West, which had Annie Oakley and Buffalo Bill Cody and all the great, Wild West figures, including a gentleman named Bill Pickett, who was early African-American. He was a Wild West entertainer, had some early film roles, really integral part of the Wild West. Except the post office didn't do their homework all that well, and they put a picture of Bill Pickett's brother on the stamp. Instead of Bill Pickett. And this was very quickly caught before the stamps went on sale, but they had all of these stamps printed with the incorrect image. So they actually held a lottery where you could, basically write into the post office and they would pull names at random to give you an opportunity to purchase one of the error stamp sheets. So they're still fairly rare. They sell for about $75. That was another thing where they averted a crisis and made a fun sort of lottery out of it for collectors. So the post office does still mess up from time to time. I mean, they're printing billions of stamps. It's natural that they're going to get things wrong every once in a while, and their responses have differed over the years.
The other story I know about is the one with the CIA and the inverted lamp.
Yeah, CIA inverts another one where that one was discovered by CIA employees in the 80s, and the controversy was who bought the stamps. Was it CIA? Was it like an official government expense that went to buy the stamps? And they actually, if I'm not mistaken, and a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, was involved in this whole thing in the 80s. But I believe they reimbursed the CIA for the cost of the stamps and felt like they owned them then. And it actually went to court and was this huge scandal. But those still sell for 15,
10,000, right?
Yeah, 10, 15, 20,000.
Seriously? Wow.
Oh, yeah. It was a sheet of 100, and I think they accidentally put 5 of them on mail, and those were never seen again. So if someone out there received one of these $10,000 stamps on a letter,
Good gracious.
they were able to salvage the other 95 or so. So yeah, that's another modern error that's sort of gone down into philatelic lore.
That's awesome. I'm glued to the edge of my seat listening to both of those stories. So that's definitely cool. A couple of comments in here. So name. Oh, this must have been in response to my buying collection. Yes.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I do. name is not bored, so that's good. There's only a couple
Appreciate
people
that.
watching, but people will watch more after. More people will watch after the show is taped. So a question here is, are vintage stamps worth more than modern stamps, or does it depend? In sports cards, there's a lot of modern cards of new players worth more than vintage players in the current respective Hall of Fame.
So you guys sort of blew my mind last night when we were talking about Ohtani briefly and what certain Ohtani cards will do these days, and he's still feels new to me. He's been around a couple of years. I would say that's less of a thing in stamp collecting. Sports cards are sort of tied to a player's performance, I would say. So obviously there's a lot of hype somebody's rookie season, and if they deliver on that hype, I would imagine the prices increase proportionately. Whereas stamp collecting, it's mostly, I don't believe it's a law, but it's an unspoken or unwritten rule that you can't issue a stamp for a living person. So it's not like we could have a stamp for a celebrity and the value could be tied to that. So I would say that's less of a trend in stamps, that modern stamps go up in value, unless you have something like the uninverted Jenny.
Right.
I think since these stamps are mostly tied to historical events or intangibles, there's less reason for something's value to, go up if somebody hits for the cycle or wins Rookie of the Year or something.
Also,
for U.S. specifically, other countries issue stamps with living people.
Yes.
Oh, that's just true.
Okay.
I was just about to throw a statement out there, which is completely useless. Which I said, people on stamps don't break their legs unless you're in different countries.
Right. And there are a lot of countries that historically have produced stamps not for use as actual postage stamps, but rather as collector's items. So every election cycle, there's these countries that will print stamps with the candidates on them, or they'll print celebrities.
Oh, right.
And there are a lot of countries whose, again, it's a big part of their economy. If you're a small island nation or something, selling commemorative postage stamps can account for a good bit of your GDP. So, other countries aren't as stringent with the rules as we are about putting.
Countries like Liberia, with the election polling and everything like that, they actually issued an error when they thought Al Gore had won the election. So there's a bunch of souvenir sheets out there of Al Gore, President Al Gore, on a souvenir sheet,
which is an error. Wink, wink. More of a marketing ploy than anything. Because more recently there were also President Hillary Clinton stamps printed.
I remember those ones.
And that those were printed well before the election, and it's mysterious how they sneak out to collectors and dealers who charge.
But people still keep an eye out for the Gore ones.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So over to you, Kent.
So it's not just error stamps that have value. Now, for example, like the British Guiana 1 cent magenta stamp, that has a lot of value. Now, are there stamps that are errorless that have a lot of value?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say much more from the 19th century, before stamp collecting was really a phenomenon. And stamp collecting in the U.S. really peaked around the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, I would say. And by that point, everything that the post office was issuing was being issued in large enough numbers that everybody who wanted one could get one, and the supply will always exceed the demand. When you get into non-error stamps that are valuable, you're really looking typically, and there's exceptions to every rule, but the earliest days of the hobby, when things were not well documented, when people might not even know that a certain stamp was issued until 20 years later, when somebody found one on a letter. Nowadays, all eyes are on the stamp issuing administrations, and it's impossible for something to be issued without piquing people's interest. But you go back to the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, and there are stamps that were legitimately issued for postal use with nothing wrong with them, no errors, and they still can bring hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
And you're looking at things like dyes, perforations, watermarks. You're looking at color types. I mean, you're looking at not just the design of a stamp and saying, okay, that's a 1 cent Franklin. You're looking at so much more. It's got X number types. It's got these frame lines. That's
a good point. That things that look identical superficially. Once you look at you have to count the number of perforations.
Really?
That matters. Whether or not the paper that it was printed on is watermarked, that matters. What printing method was used? Was it a rotary press? Was it a flat plate press? Was it lithography? There's certain stamps that were printed by different methods, so you have to look at that. So that's also when you get into rarity, is when maybe at the time everything looked the same. Yeah, it was just a 1 cent green stamp with Ben Franklin on it. But it wasn't until later that people realized, oh, this is on unwatermarked paper and it's perforated 10 versus perforated 12. So little things like that, again, to the average person off the street mean nothing, can have a huge impact on value as well.
What about art? So I was just thinking about this now. Like some stamps, the art on it is quite unique, right? They put a lot of effort into the art. Now, what's interesting is for trading cards, it's a 2.5 by 3.5, right? So it's the size of the card is this big, right? A stamp, relatively speaking, is quite small, right? So and if you look at it, it's like micro printing, right? So if you look at a stamp in here, there's micro printing on there.
Yep.
So the artwork matter a lot with stamps. Like eye appeal, is that something that is an important qualifier?
It can, but a lot of the most popular and expensive stamps are the most primitive. So, typically when something was well engraved or well lithographed, that meant they were going to print a lot of them. And typically they're going to be more common. Whereas, let's say a postmaster in British Guiana or in Mauritius ran out of stamps and the next ship from the UK is not going to be there for a couple of months. They looked around them and basically had to make do with what they had. There was a missionary in Uganda in the 1890s who wanted to set up his own postal system, didn't have a way of producing stamps, but he had a typewriter. So the Ugandan missionary stamps are literally him typing on a piece of paper. And then I think he, if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on this, but I think he used his wife's sewing machine to create perforations between the stamps.
Are you serious?
Hand-typed.
Oh, really? Wow.
And the sewing needle would punch the holes in it. So in that case, it is the least artistic, ugliest thing ever produced. But it's the rarity factor. So sometimes rarity and beauty correlate, and other times you look at something and you're like, "There's no way I'd pay more than $10 for this," and somebody pays $50,000 for it. So a lot of times, the most primitive, crudely produced stamps can be the rarest. So if anything, there might be an inverse relationship there.
Interesting.
That's really interesting. And also, beauty is an eye of the beholder, but I like that. That's a different perspective than trading cards, I would say, Kent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a question from Name, actually.
Oh, let's see. When I was a kid, I watched a great movie about stamp collecting called Tommy Tricker and the Stamp Traveler. Have you guys ever seen it?
I've never even heard. I just Googled it.
I've heard of that. I've never actually seen it. I actually haven't seen that. I've heard it mentioned by a bunch of different people.
Oh, really? Okay.
Film in which a young boy, Ralph, and his sister discover a magical ability to travel the world writing within postage stamps. Complicated by a series of rules, they are soon lost in such far-flung places as Australia and China. I'm gonna.
Yeah, I think they use the Canada Blue Nose. They use one of the Chinese junk ships.
This looks great.
Yeah, I know the plot, but I've never actually seen the movie itself.
It looks like the Goonies meet stamp collecting.
I love the fact that you know Goonies, so I don't feel so old. Good name, good question.
Great question.
I appreciate that because that's going to add to my cultural philatelic knowledge once I've seen that. So that'll be a lot of fun.
I'll be honest with you. I'm probably going to be up tonight researching stupid stuff about stamps now that you kind of opened my eyes.
There's a great podcast you can listen to. No.
Yes.
I was listening to it today while I was working. That's why I picked up on some of the references. But there's also... Wait, I'll stop. Let's get back to our questions before we go off topic.
Yes. So, fellas, can you tell us, when it comes to Philately, about the Grand Prix d'Honneur at Belgique Award? How does one get bestowed this honor and award?
So this goes back into the exhibiting side of things, where once you sort of max out of national exhibiting, these international shows, which are all around the world. There's one in Hungary next year. There's one in London next year. There's actually one in Canada next year. We're going to be heading up to Toronto for 8 days, 4 days of stamp show. But yeah, these international shows each has their own Grand Prix award. This is really what people are vying for. I think the national exhibiting is just sort of a means to an end to get to that next international level. So it's always really competitive and really fun. There was a stamp show in Stockholm a couple of years ago that just a lot of this happens behind closed doors. And of course, there's, like I said earlier, there's politics involved. And
right.
But in Stockholm, they decided to make the entire thing transparent. And they actually had a big display screen that was showing who got points in real time. So you could follow along almost like a horse race, like what judges are allotting their points to what exhibitors. So yeah, the international exhibiting is really intense and really fun, and you get wrapped up in it. So yeah, Canada will have one of those shows next year. The US's next one will be in Boston in 2026. Planning is already underway 5 years out. So yeah, it's a fun part of the hobby.
Huh.
Just to show you how nerdy I am, just so you'll probably notice me looking off screen. I'm actually looking at an auction and bidding on while I'm talking to you. So I'm like looking and then looking through the price, and I'm like, I'm getting close to winning. Anyways, so pardon me, I'm not trying to be rude. It's just
trust me, I'd be doing the same thing.
Okay. Sure. Go ahead, Ken.
So when it comes to stamp collecting, we kind of touched upon it earlier. Does it matter that the stamps you collect have a cancellation mark on them? Should you always try and get the stamp off the paper that it's adhered to, or just leave it attached to the paper?
So this kind of tied back to the whole, in order to use a stamp, you have to damage it, and then you have to kind of carefully remove it to preserve it from being damaged any further. There's actually people, once you remove it, who collect cancellations. So they'll collect. It's very popular in different Asian markets. There's the Japanese market for collecting cancellations is incredible, because they want the specific town cancels on that stamp. So obviously it would be better on the cover. Now, whenever you see a stamp on the cover, the first thing I say to people is please don't soak that off.
I'm going to interrupt really quick. Cover. It's just our insider term for envelope.
Okay.
If a stamp is on cover,
I do that often.
Again, that's one of our industry quirks. So when we say cover, we mean envelope.
We have a lot more idioms. Trust me. That stuff, like, we call things breaking wax. They haven't used wax on hobby packs in probably 40 years. So there's an example, right?
Yeah. No. So the cancellation collecting market is quite large, and there's actually within the United States been entire books written on how rare a cancellation is based on the population of the town, how many people were mailing letters, outgoing letters, things like that. So how many letters could have possibly been mailed out of that town makes that town cancel rarer, and an entire rarity index was built for the United States on specific towns mailing out of them and into them. So, I mean, sometimes cancellations can really make or break the stamp, but I mean, it really depends on the stamp.
Yeah, I was gonna say, some people just do mint, some people do them on the envelope. So it's really a collector by collector basis, and certain stamps are rarer mint than they are used. There's sort of no one size fits all solution for this.
Yeah.
I would say the general trend is that mint stamps are more valuable than used stamps. But again, for every rule like that I can give you, there will be hundreds of exceptions.
There's a number of Italian or German stamps that are worth many multiples used than they are actually mint.
Huh.
Wow.
And items like that you'd really want to send out to make sure that they have a certificate, because people will try and put fake cancellations on them to increase the value of the stamp.
It's much easier to create a fake used stamp than it is a fake mint stamp, obviously.
Yes.
So
there's
I think I was just going to add, I think that some of the worst cancellations I've seen is somebody at the post office taking a pen and going, eh.
This is a huge subject of debate on
Yeah.
Twitter, actually.
Yeah.
Everyone
Oh, yeah.
has their own opinion on the pen cancel. Some people think that it's real and it proves that a postal clerk actually handled something. Other people think it's hideous and ugly and defaces the stamp. So yeah, that's actually a hot topic of debate.
It's funny because when I was doing eBay packages, I would make the postal clerk date stamp my postage because if they ever came after me, I'm like, well, go look at the date. I mailed it.
Yeah.
Like,
but a lot of the eBay envelopes don't fit through the machine, so they've got to either use a hand stamp or a pen. So yeah, that's a contentious issue.
They used to get really annoyed at me, and the real reason I did it was two phases. One, it's I could prove that I posted, I mailed it on that day, and the other one was I didn't want it coming back to me when I was like, not enough postage. Those are the worst days when you come back home and your envelope return insufficient funds. I'm like, I was just there. I was just there. You're robbing me. So just like sports cards, there's always a feeling of FOMO or fear of missing out. What are some suggestions you would give to people to avoid the pratfalls of buying stamps to make a quick buck or two?
I'm letting you take this one first, Michael.
So, yeah, I mean, making a quick buck on stamps, I don't think has been. I haven't come across too many people who try to buy 1 year and then sell the other with the intention of turning a profit, because it's a collector's hobby, really. I mean, there's a lot of people that I could see in other hobbies, they kind of ride the market with coins. Right. It's a lot easier. I don't know how the trading card market is for that. It seems like the prices are easier to track. There's a lot more grading. There's a lot more slabbing, things like that. They have finite prices that you can track, and stamps don't really have that because everything is so condition based. You could line 50 of the 50 US number ones, which is the first stamp ever issued in the United States. You could line 50 of them up on a table, all in used condition, and they could be worth 50 different prices, 50 different varying prices based on how large the margins are, how heavy the strike is on the cancel, if they've got thins, if they've got tears, if they've been repaired. So it's a lot harder to make a quick buck off stamp collecting unless you're really, really know that what you're buying is going to appreciate in value in the next few years, and that's hard to tell.
The other thing I would say in terms of fear of missing out is, and this is advice that I've been given and I've tried to pass on to people, there are certain stamps that you need to make compromises for, that you need to, maybe it's got a little tear in it, maybe it's missing a perforation or two, maybe, again, if you're going to collect, T206 or 1933 Gaudi or something, you're going to have to compromise, if you ever want to add these to your collection. But if you can afford a nice example of a stamp, you should always buy the nicest copy you can reasonably afford.
There you go.
A lot of people think they can, again, cut corners and compromise on quality. And if you're just looking to fill as many gaps as possible, that might be fine for you. But if you're looking to get the most out of your collection, both in terms of enjoyment and when it comes time to sell, splurge on that stamp that's never hinged. Splurge on that stamp that's well centered. You'll never regret that. You may regret, buying the stamp that's off center or it has a little tear or a little crease in it. That you may regret later on. So I was always told early on, you buy the nicest you can afford. And I think that's really important advice in stamps.
So
you don't want to be making excuses for your stamps later down the road.
Right, got it.
Here, Kent and I have a very fierce battle on this. So Kent always goes and buys the nicest he can afford. I always err on the side of caution. So my gut feel is there are far more. Let's pretend I'll use this in your case. There's one stamp. The best stamp is worth $1 million, right? And the next stamp is the next three stamps below are 30, or next grade below is worth $30,000, right? There are far more people in the world that'll spend $30,000 than they'll spend $1 million. So I would rather own three $30,000 cards that I know I can move versus one card which I may have to find a special guy to buy it. So I'm like, okay, sure, it makes a lot of sense for me, But from a liquidity point of view and an outlier, if I, in 20 years when I want to sell everything and retire, what's going to go further? So I'm okay making smaller amounts of margin, but I know that my reach is much more significant, right? If it was purely, everything I buy is from an evaluation of where I am now, where I'm going to be in 20 years, where's the market going to be in 20 years, right? Now, no one's ever perfect at that, but that's kind of how I've approached everything. So Kent and I argue because Kent can go and buy the top dollar card, and I'm like, well, I'd rather get 5 of those, right? Because I know more guys that are broke than I know that are rich, right? So that's the kind of attitude I have with that. But I understand quality is quality, and from a purely collecting standpoint, 100% agree with you. From a liquidity point of view, from a business sense, I have to hedge. I have to hedge, right? I have to hedge a bit.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I can see both sides. I really can, because you only need those 2 people. If it's $1 million card,
Right.
you only need 2 people to want it.
Yeah.
Whereas, there's maybe a lot more people who are willing to spend the 30,000, but then the cap is still at the 30,000. But if it's the $1 million, if there's only one, if it's unique, the 2 people who want it really badly could go for more than that. Whereas the $30,000 one, if there's multiples of them, they will appreciate in value, but maybe not to the multiples that the unique item always moves.
Michael, you're not helping me at all. And I love that you're positioned on the screen right below Kent, so now I'm getting close to the right side. So anyways, let's just move on before I get more counterpoints and completely debunk my buying philosophy. So want to get into some of the things that we talked about the other day was actually no, we'll skip this one question. We'll go to the next one because I want to be sensitive to time because it does get a little bit late, and I know we can get tired. So at least I get tired. From when you're in your travels of doing your work and you're working at an auction house and you're doing buying and selling, how often do you come into counterfeits? Is it really hard to detect? It sounds like you guys use a lot of loops and technologies and reference materials and fake issues to compare against. But I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's sort of two sides to this coin. The first are stamps that are outright forgeries. Somebody took paper and printed on it and made it look like a stamp, and nothing about it is genuine in any way. Those are typically fairly easy to spot if you know what you're looking for. There are some exceptionally well done forgeries that can be difficult, but by and large, if you've handled enough of these things, the outright fakes tend to be they're more intended to defraud beginners, I would say. What's much more dangerous are altered genuine stamps. So, for example, people will. So you've got a sheet of stamps, and it's perforated, and the stamps around the outside of the sheet don't have perforations on that side.
Oh, right. Yes. Right.
Yes. Okay.
So a stamp with perforations on all 4 sides is worth more than a stamp with perforations on just 3 sides. Yeah. That's the weird quirk of collecting. It's more balanced. It's more aesthetically pleasing. So people will take a stamp that is not perforated on one side and add perforations to it. Or we were talking earlier about how the hinging will disturb the gum. People will smooth over the gum a little bit. They'll make it look like it's never been hinged, or maybe a stamp has no gum at all, and they'll apply a whole new layer of gum to the back of it. They'll remove a cancellation to make a used stamp look mint. So they're genuine stamps that have just been doctored in order to make them more valuable. That's much more dangerous, I would say, than an outright fake.
I was going to say, I can't imagine anybody trying to duplicate a perforation because they're so small, but they're doing it.
They're doing it exceptionally well, too.
Really?
These things are so hard to detect. Absolutely. So, so again, these are the things that we have to look for. They're very tough. You have to handle hundreds and thousands of stamps before you can really feel confident. Luckily, there are a couple of third-party independent expertising services that will, provide their unbiased opinion. That's great. Their opinions are generally held in very high regard. But for on our end, we don't want it to get to that point necessarily. We want to be able to do a lot of this in-house.
Right,
So
right.
we're faced with this basically every day. I mean, people will go as far as to find an old envelope and put a genuine stamp on it, and then create the cancellation and write in the address, and they'll create these concoctions that are very dangerous to the untrained eye.
That is insane, because we deal with that too. So we have fakes from the vintage point of view, we have fakes from the modern point of view, and of course we deal with fakes on a different level, like memorabilia gets repassed. So it's good to know that you guys are seeing it in a sense. It's also bad that it's unfortunate, right?
And then there's a third completely different. So there's forgeries, there's altered stamps, but then there's also counterfeits, which were intended to defraud the postal service. So to this day, if you go on eBay, a lot of people will be selling stamps under face value.
Yeah.
And typically these are, being shipped from other countries. They're not being produced here. And they're counterfeit postage stamps. They're being made to be put on mail to defraud the government. So,
really?
And this has been going on since the 19th century as well. So that's a case where they're fakes. They may have tricked the post office, but now they're highly valued by collectors as well. So that's a whole other class of. That's a case where a fake can be more valuable than the real thing, or oftentimes.
And if I may branch off there, we have this whole other conversation in the hobby where people are repairing things for conservation purposes. So we've spoken to people, and there's people in the UK, and then there's people within the United States who will actually repair stamps, repair covers, repair documents to make them more appealing to the eye, not to change their monetary value, but to conserve them as historical documents for collectors down the road. And this is an interesting conversation, because this is something that's so much more accepted in the coin world, where you just dip a coin. And you can just, NGC has their own conservation department where we send coins in and say, can you grade this? And they come back and they say, actually, we want to clean it first. We'll clean it and then grade it, and then it's an extra fee. And then they expertly clean the coin. They alter the coin and then slab it to make it more valuable than if they hadn't cleaned it in the first place. And this isn't something that's widely accepted among a lot of philatelists. They see it as disingenuous. They see it as not, they see it as repairing stamps, because that's something that's, if a stamp is repaired, it makes it less valuable. But then there's these people who are repairing stamps not to make them more valuable, but to preserve the stamps. They're not doing it to fool anybody. They're just repairing the stamps for good intentions.
In the trading card hobby, there are very few, because it's a no to touch a card. Alter any card any way, shape, or form. In art, and you mentioned this, you touched on this, but in the art world, very high quality pieces are restored, and that's okay. Now, here's the funny part. Those things are worth millions upon millions, some of these pieces, right? Some in the 10 to 20 million, and they're okay to be restored. But in our industry, the minute you even blow on the card the wrong direction, it's trimmed, it's altered, and we have forums and groups of these evangelical detectives that will go and hunt you down, right? To expose you. So it's a very touchy subject in the trading card world. Now, you just exposed something. It is a nuance with both sides of the coin. From a historical significance point of view, which we understand, hey, we want to make this look like this is a piece of history. And then you get the true collector saying, don't touch it. So your world is a bridge between two worlds. Ours is direct no. Art is yes. Right? And you're in the middle. So I can't say one is worse or better than the other, but I'll let you comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough, because on one hand, you need to provide a document saying that you've altered the stamp. But if it's really the intention behind it, because anyone can send in these stamps. You could have a stamp dealer who buys a stamp with a tear in it, send it to someone to repair the stamp for conservation purposes and then throw out the document
Right.
and then sell it as a genuine stamp with no faults. So, I mean, it's a debate within the community that I feel like the community hasn't really picked a side yet. Obviously, these people who are conserving items are doing tremendous work repairing and preserving some items that would deteriorate over time if they weren't doing this. If they weren't doing the work, these items would definitely deteriorate, lose value, they'd be destroyed in one way or another, accidentally and over time. But the fact that they're doing it, does it devalue it, or does it add value, or does it not change the value whatsoever?
We have like 7 shows we can do out of this show. That's actually a really interesting segue. So I want to just stop for a quick second. It's a 2-hour mark. We have 3 questions left. Shall we finish and then call it a night? Or are you guys tired?
Let's do it.
I say go for it.
Good?
There's 3
Good?
questions left. Yeah.
All right.
One all over again for you guys.
All right, we're going to go for it, Ken. This is the first time since the first show. So we were joking about our first show that went 3.5 hours. That 3.5 hours is very stressful. So I was like looking after questions. This has been a breeze. So let's get back into it. So one of the questions I skipped over, we'll talk about real quick. So I want to paint a scenario for you, and you're going to tell me what your feeling is when you hear the scenario. I receive mail. I open the envelope, and I throw the envelope in the garbage with the stamp on it. What happens to your feeling then, Michael?
Yeah, we got to pull it out. We got to pull it out of the trash. Wipe any trash off of it. I can't. I say this to so many people. I can't, in good conscience, recommend throwing out any stamps under any circumstance. We sell literal bags sometimes of stamps that are just cut off envelopes. We call it kiloware in our business, and we weigh them by the pound. And I'll sell 50 pounds of stamps in a literal trash bag, and people will buy them. Yeah, absolutely. And people buy them because everything is collectible.
That's amazing.
No one should be throwing out anything.
I'm a bit more measured. When I was starting out, every single stamp had to be kept. And I've gotten a little bit better, I would say, just in terms of hoarding. My thing is I would like to have at least one example of every new stamp issued by the post office. So if it's the same flag stamp that comes in on every other envelope, I don't have to keep every single one. But when, the Wilt Chamberlain stamp comes out, or when the Harry Potter and Star Wars stamps come out, I want to keep one of each. I would love to have one example of every, current U.S. stamp issue. So if I see something new that I haven't seen before, it's the Star Trek stamp or the Batman stamp, I will cut those off. I have a drawer in my desk that is just full of, corner clippings from envelopes.
You've got all your cousins are like, you don't write me anymore. Well, I can call you. No, please write me.
And I have this dream that it's going to be a rainy day, and I can just tackle this drawer and do something with it. But it'll probably never get to that point. It'll just keep growing and growing.
Yeah, I like the both of you. I have not ever tossed a stamp in the trash on an envelope. I've actually cut them all out, and I have boxes of them sitting somewhere in my room here. But yeah,
I'm a very lonely person. People don't write me, so I don't have boxes and doodles and stuff. But I do stuff like this where I'll keep, stamps that I cut off the corners. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with these things, but whatever. Anyways,
don't throw them in the trash. Just don't throw them.
Well, I'll have to contribute it to Michael's $50 grab bag of rando stamps. I have a part to play in this.
Michael will send me eBay listings sometimes where it's like a 20-pound bag of stamps that I wouldn't. No offense to anyone buying this stuff, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't pay like $20 or $30 for it, and it sells for like $600.
Wow.
It blows my mind, the price. But people enjoy just digging through the stuff and seeing what.
That's true. They do enjoy digging through. That's for sure.
It's the diamond in the rough. It's the treasure hunt, and I think that's really cool. I'm not knocking that at all. I admire that.
My grandfather gave me a whole box of stamps from India, so I'm gonna go look at those now. Maybe I'll have the Gandhi 48. Never know.
Yeah.
If I do, I'll be calling you both. So, one question I wanted to ask, and I don't know if we asked this in here, but I'll ask you real quick because it actually came to my mind, is you did mention stamps get graded. Who are the grading authorities that look after stamps from a grading perspective?
So in the U.S., there are 4 expertising services. So when you send a stamp off to one of these companies, there's 2 things you're looking for. There is grading, which with stamps, it's so with comic books, for example, it's the condition of the comic book. It's how creased or how dinged up is it, and I think cards are similar.
Yes.
Whereas with stamps, on the one hand, you do have the condition, is it intact and everything. But what they're really looking for is the centering of the stamp. So you never really think about how well centered a stamp is until you start looking for it.
So this is Beckett. So Beckett graded.
Oh, yeah.
So I bought this because I thought it was really cool.
That is cool. So yeah, with you can even see that the margins have to be perfectly balanced. That's what we're talking about with grading and stamps. So it's less the condition and more the appearance of the stamp.
Wait, sorry, the camera is playing tricks on me. I don't know if you can see that.
Cool.
You need to do what the trick what Michael and Charles said yesterday. Have it on a black background.
Oh, really? Okay, hold on.
So that's it.
Now you can see the proofs.
Oh yeah.
That's
that's a 3-sided perf, right? I think
exactly. You could add perforations to it.
It is a 3-sided.
You're looking at the centering, and then you're also looking at the authenticity. So these services sort of provide 2 roles. It's again authenticity and condition / centering. The 2 biggest ones in the U.S. are called the Philatelic Foundation. They've been around since 1945. They're in Midtown Manhattan. And the other one is more recent and sort of giving them a run for their money is called PSE, Professional Stamp Experts. They're out of Henderson, Nevada. So those are the PF and PSE are both equally recognized and equally legitimate and equally accepted. They've each got their own strengths and weaknesses, I would say.
So would you say those are the 2 that most stamp collectors would send them to?
Absolutely. Those are the 2. Again, there are other ones that are that do have some, again, everyone's got their own thing they specialize in, but the PF and PSE are the 2 that we refer people to all the time.
So I'll show you another one I picked up it's a Canadian thing. So it's Terry Fox. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, a block of 4.
Yeah.
So Terry Fox is a legend in Canada. He ran across Canada to raise money for cancer. So this is unused. So I thought it was cool. A guy I know that collected trading cards had these, so I picked those up.
And those are still the Lickham ones, right? I mean,
these are the ones that have never been. Well, see, his house. I thought it was cool. I'm like, oh, they've never used. And then you're like, we have to destroy them. I'm like, oh, okay. So anyway, that was cool. So sorry, keep going ahead. You were saying?
Do you have anything to add, Michael?
No, I mean that's it. The other ones would be the APS, which is Apex, and then the last one is wait, I forget the name of it. What is it?
PSAG is out of Florida.
PSAG, yeah.
And the thing is, a lot of these companies will send the stamps to like independent experts on the stamp, so they're all drawing from the same pool of knowledge, basically. I think that of the big 4 in America, you're basically looking at comparable certificates. It's it's who do you personally feel most comfortable with, and there's no reason to knock any of them. I would say those 4 are all equally respectable.
So
that's just within the United States. Sometimes if we get foreign material, you send it to the actual country. We get German material, we send it to Germany for German experts.
Oh, okay.
You get British material, you send it to Great Britain, the Royal for those kind of experts.
Interesting. And actually, APS, I believe you mentioned, is one of your sponsors, I guess, for we're looking at. So APS, ASDA, and Stamp Collector Magazine, and APS must be the grading company you were talking about.
So the APS is the American Philatelic Society. They have a grading division. They're sort of the national governing body of stamp collecting.
Okay, okay.
And within that, they put on the annual show. They put on the show in Chicago. They have their grading service. They've got a lot of different branches within the organization.
So how does it feel to have backing from three fairly prominent entities in the stamp world?
Yeah, it was very unexpected because we just thought we were starting something, small for ourselves to talk to our friends, everything like that. But to have actual support from legitimate organizations that have been around for supporting collectors for decades is just, it's been a tremendous, it's meant a lot to us, and it's given us a lot of opportunities that we would not have had without their backing. The Stamp Collector Magazine has introduced us to so many collectors across the pond, and the APS has given us a lot of opportunities, like the Tiffany Talk, and the ASDA has been such a tremendous sponsor and been so supportive to us. So yeah, I mean, it's meant a lot. It definitely wasn't something we were expecting.
Awesome. So we have 3 questions, gentlemen. 3 left. Unless I come up with something off the top of my head. I'm sure I will. I just won't this time. Kent, the rest is you, buddy.
Yes, so the use of technology such as YouTube, Zoom, Instagram live feeds has allowed you to bring your show and the love of philately across geographical areas around the globe with little to no restrictions. Being able to bring hobby content to other philatelists around the world, what's the feedback been like?
It's been great. We've met a ton of people that we would never have gotten to meet, and a lot of people who do the same kind of thing within the hobby, but for different reasons. So people who show their own collections, people who pick out individual stamps and then give stories on those stamps after researching. People then go into topical material and research the different topics that they've picked out for themselves. So it's given us the opportunity to meet these kind of people and see the different way that people can utilize social media to kind of spread their love of philately in a similar way to us.
When it kind of became real for me was Michael and I started doing a weekly live stream about 2 months ago, where Michael and I talk on the phone constantly about what's going on in the hobby, what auctions are there, what new stamps are there, and we thought, why not broadcast this to maybe other people would be interested as well.
Sure.
So we held the first live stream, and we heard from a couple of people in California that we started it too early. So we were like, we'll push it back a couple hours. Then when we pushed it back, we heard from somebody in Japan who said, now you're starting it too late. It's midnight for me to have to. And when we started having to worry about people's time zones for a live stream, I was like, wow, that made it real that, you really are interacting with people. It's great to go to a local show and see people from your state, definitely your time zone. But when, we go on Twitter and there's people from Australia, there's people from Japan, there's people from Great Britain. That's what makes it a lot of fun is just getting to connect with people we otherwise, these people are out there, and a lot of people, they're not involved in the more formal side of the hobby. They don't go to shows and they don't participate in auctions, but it doesn't mean they don't have the passion. And I feel like Twitter and Instagram in particular have allowed us to connect with those people who otherwise would be collecting in sort of a parallel alternate universe where they have the same feelings and passions and excitements as we have.
They do,
But yeah, before the last couple of years, there's been no easy way to get a hold of them, and now we can, and that's been really rewarding.
It also helped your business ventures too, right? Because you're exposing your business side of things too, which is you wouldn't have been able to otherwise, right? So expansion.
Yeah, that's always been kind of a secondary to us mostly. Yeah. I mean, we do a tiny bit of self-promotion sometimes, but we like to talk to other people. We talk to other dealers. We talk to other auction houses. So for us, it's a lot about talking to people about the hobby, talking to collectors and everything like that. And we don't really try and, you know,
I respect
we
that.
don't really try to talk about ourselves too much.
And if it helps our respective businesses, that's a great side effect. But it's definitely not why we set out to do any of this.
Mhm.
We can tell that.
I love hearing from people saying that they connected with a dealer that we spoke to because of an episode.
Yeah.
They're discovering, adjacent philatelists, adjacent dealers, adjacent auction houses to us. We just want to help people find the material that they're looking for and allow them to collect better and more easily.
Awesome. Two more questions, boys.
More to go. So the second last question. What advice would you give to those who are watching tonight and then later on as this episode gets replayed on YouTube on wanting to become a first-time stamp collector, or as you would say, a philatelist?
Organizations help. You never have to do anything alone. I definitely recommend getting at least the Scott Beginner catalog. They have like a tiny one like this that has the coils for people just but yeah, organizations, reach out to an organization to see if there's any assistance in
whether it's local
discovering what you want. Yeah.
Yes. Again, the APS serves the whole world and especially the United States. And then you might have your local, your county or your city has its own stamp club. But I agree with that. Definitely don't do it alone.
You should never collect. You should never collect alone.
Yeah.
Ever. No matter what it is, you should never collect alone. That's just a recipe for disaster.
The other thing I would say is sort of be very flexible. Don't have any preconceptions about what you want to collect. I'm sure that I don't know everyone's story in the card hobby, but it would be my guess that collecting indigenous rookie cards maybe wasn't the first thing somebody sets out to collect. You sort of have to find your own way. And a lot of the things I collect, I collected very early on. But I've also discovered so many new and exciting things that I've just stumbled across. So I think if you go in with blinders on and if you go in with a very narrow focus, you might get burnt out quickly. You might run out of stuff to collect or just feel like you're putting yourself into a box when you don't have to do that. So I think being very open-minded, obviously you don't have to collect the entire world because that's a bit overwhelming as well. But again, you never know what's going to catch your eye. I'll be digging through a box of envelopes or a box of stamps and just see something cool or weird or something that looks like it has a story behind it. And it might not fit into any of what I collect. It's just something that I like. I could probably talk myself out of buying it. Oh, this doesn't fit what I do. But again, I think that if you go in with an open mind and allow yourself to get distracted, that there can be a lot of fun in that part of the hobby as well.
Or somebody could just pick a topic like your mom did and just do it all cats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's like, again, now she collects cats on postcards, and she, there's so many different angles to go. I think it's important too to not have this image of stamp collecting as just an old guy in his basement with a pair of tongs and a stamp album. It can be like that if you want, but it can also be so many other things. Don't have any preconceptions about it, I think is really important.
Awesome. We're at our last question.
Yes. So we want to thank you both, Charles and Michael, for lasting this long. And actually for being our guests on our show tonight. We really do appreciate it. So we usually end off our show with this one particular question. And right now, Michael, who should I throw it to? I'll throw it to Charles first, and then I'll throw it to Michael after. So what inspires you, Charles? And then we'll go with Michael.
One of the big things that inspires me, especially with the letters and the envelopes with the stamp still on them, is this sense that, again, I mentioned early on, maybe F. Scott Fitzgerald used this stamp, but even if somebody wasn't famous, even if somebody wasn't noteworthy, these letters and these envelopes are a piece of their life. And these people have long since moved on. Obviously, at some point, either they or their descendants got rid of these things because they're in the hands of collectors now. So they got separated from the people who they meant something to. So for me, one of the things that inspires me is sort of a sense of obligation to the people who came before us to keep their memories alive, whether it's reading a letter they wrote or again, just preserving a piece of these people. When I travel, I go to cemeteries for the same reason. I want to keep these people's memories alive. I want to visit their graves. I want to read their letters. Again, they may have been a totally insignificant person. Maybe they didn't do anything big and exciting with their life, but these letters are still testaments to them. And we had a gentleman on, the guy in Japan who we've tried to work our schedule around. And he researches the stories behind people and he said he does it for the same reason, that these were living, breathing individuals, and all we might have from them is a letter or an envelope. So for me, it's partially a sense of duty to keep them alive in whatever small way I can. So that's one of the big things that inspires me. The content of the letter meant enough to somebody for them to actually write it in the first place. And it's up to us to be sort of the curators and stewards of that letter today. So again, I think that's one big thing that inspires me is just the humans behind these things.
That was a very good answer. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that
for
was because
you,
I was going to say
pressure's on you, Mike.
yeah, I was going to say the people, but maybe not the people behind the stamps themselves, like to take Charles's answer, but the people collecting the material. So an answer just like Charles is the passion behind the actual collectors is really what inspires me, because no two collectors are identical. Just like no two stamps are really identical. The people collect in such a unique way. The fact that everybody's looking for something new, and I can talk to someone and I ask them what they collect at a show, and they say, well, I collect this, this, and this, but I tripped on a chair and now I collect this. And, they're all searching for something else to build and to find. And it's the thrill of the hunt. And it's just the unique human experience of trying to collect things, to find the passion there. And that's really what inspires me, is what people can find in absolutely anything, and what they love about the hobby itself.
Those are very elegant answers, I appreciate it, and I can sense the genuineness of it. So I appreciate you both for doing this.
Thank you.
So,
This has
you
been a
both.
lot of fun. Again, there's so many side tangents we could have gone off on.
Oh yeah.
There's,
This has not felt like
We could do another show literally on the other tangents.
I have ideas. There's certain angles I want to go down now, and I think you both have kind of.
No, let's all keep in touch after this. This has been a lot
Absolutely.
of fun.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
What we'll do is I will. You guys hang out there. We'll end the show, and for the one person who stayed behind this long, thank you very much for watching. It's a bit of it's an hour and 26 more longer than we normally do, but this will be taped and up on YouTube, so everyone can watch it for whenever plus a day. And I believe, Kent, we're going to be doing it again with these guys very soon.
I would think so. Yes.
Yes. So we all agree
Great.
that you guys are definitely going to be our guests again. So we can't
We would
wait.
love to.
For sure.
Awesome.
So hang out there, and just.
So name it saying later, guys. So name. There
Thank
you
you
go.
for sticking around this whole time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great questions, and
Yeah.
I
really.
gotta give Name a big. Like, he stood around for 2.5 hours. Even I wouldn't watch my own show. For 2.5
Yeah,
hours.
don't forget though. Don't forget though. Name's on the West Coast, so it's not even late for him right now.
True, but he does have a family.
Yes.
You guys hang out right there. Let me just end the broadcast, and we'll take it from there.
Perfect.
Everyone else,
All right.
good
Thank
night,
you.
and we'll let
Good
you
night.
know who our next guest is when we book them. Cheers.